My name is Bethany. I am 33 years old, and in my family, the golden son gets absolutely everything. My parents paid my brother's rent, bought him a luxury house, and even secretly cleared his massive gambling debts while telling me to learn independence. But at our Christmas dinner, they found out I quietly built a $75 million company completely on my own. My brother fell to the floor crying, demanding I hand over at least $25 million, while my mother screamed that I stole his future. What they did not know was that I was the only thing standing between them and total financial ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who constantly underestimated your worth. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut suburb meant keeping up appearances at all costs. To the outside world, my parents Howard and Brenda were the picture of success. Inside our sprawling suburban mansion, with its ridiculous indoor waterfall and vaulted ceilings, the reality was a suffocating hierarchy where my brother Preston reigned supreme. Preston is 35 years old and has spent his entire adult life bouncing from one failed business venture to the next, always subsidized by the bank of mom and dad. I sat silently at the edge of the massive mahogany dining table this past Christmas Eve, methodically pushing a single piece of roasted asparagus around my plate. The dining room smelled of expensive catering and unearned entitlement. At the head of the table sat my father, his chest puffed out in a velvet smoking jacket. To his right was my mother, draped in pearls that I strongly suspected were purchased on a maxed-out credit line. But the true star of the evening, as always, was Preston. Preston swirled his expensive scotch, leaning back in his chair with the arrogance of a man who had never paid his own phone bill. Beside him sat his wife, Simone. Simone is a beautiful African-American lifestyle influencer, her natural hair styled in an immaculate updo, her flawless makeup catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. She had a penchant for weaponizing psychological buzzwords to justify her and Preston's endless demands. Currently, she was holding court about Preston's newest supposed achievement. "It is really just about generational wealth and manifesting abundance," Simone said, her voice dripping with practiced serenity. She placed her manicured hand over Preston's. When Howard bought Preston the new Tesla Model S Plaid yesterday, it was not just a gift. It was an acknowledgement of Preston's journey. He is doing the inner work, Bethany. He is healing his financial trauma to build an empire. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the cold liquid ground me. "What empire is that exactly?" I asked, my voice calm, but cutting through the self-congratulatory atmosphere. Last I checked, his drop-shipping sneaker business folded 6 months ago, and before that, his crypto advisory firm lasted exactly 3 weeks. The table went dead silent. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls with a dramatic flair. "Your toxic negativity is exactly why you are struggling," Simone retorted smoothly, her tone shifting from serene to deeply pitying. "You project your own stagnation onto your brother. You really should look into mindfulness. It might help you hold space for other people's success instead of radiating jealousy at the dinner table." "Your sister-in-law is right!" my father boomed, slamming his heavy hand on the table and rattling the silverware. "Preston earned that Tesla. He has the entrepreneurial spirit of this family. He is the future. Meanwhile, you are still messing around with whatever little coding gig you have in the city. You need to learn how to be a team player, Bethany." I did not blink. I knew the reality behind this so-called entrepreneurial spirit. I knew about the shadow loans, the subprime mortgages, and the desperate refinancing my parents had done to keep Preston living in his multi-million-dollar illusion. But before I could reply and shatter their delicate fantasy, a sharp notification chime echoed from my father's chest pocket. My father pulled out his phone, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "Google Alerts," he muttered, adjusting his reading glasses. "I have it set for the family name. Let us see what this is." His voice trailed off completely. I watched as the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a splotchy, sickly gray. His hands began to tremble so violently that the phone nearly slipped from his grasp. He looked from the glowing screen to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute shock and sheer disbelief. Howard, what is it? My mother asked, leaning over her chair in a panic. It is an article, he choked out, swallowing hard. From Forbes. Preston chuckled, taking another confident sip of his scotch. Forbes. Did they finally do a write-up on my real estate consulting pitch? I told you guys that press release would gain traction. No, my father whispered. His voice was shaking as he read the headline aloud to the silent room. The Quiet Disruption: How 33-year-old CEO Bethany Has Revolutionized Debt Management. Clear Path. Financial Secure Series B. Funding. Pushing company valuation to $75 million. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the room seemed to vanish instantly. Preston's scotch glass slipped from his limp fingers. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending amber liquid and sharp crystal flying everywhere. He did not even notice the mess ruining his designer loafers. He just stared at me, his jaw completely unhinged. 75 million, my mother whispered, the number sounding foreign and impossible on her tongue. Simone's perfectly curated aura of peace vanished in a heartbeat. Her eyes darted rapidly between my father's phone and my calm, impassive face. That has to be a typo, Simone stammered, her influencer composure cracking. A $75 million valuation. Bethany, you told us you did. IT support. I told you I worked in financial technology. I corrected, my voice smooth and cold. You just never cared enough to ask for any details. Preston bolted upright, his chair screeching violently against the floor. His face turned a dangerous mottled red, the veins in his neck bulging as the reality of the numbers crashed into his fragile ego. Wait a minute, he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. Clear Path. Financial. An app that handles debt restructuring. Yes, I said, crossing my arms comfortably. That was my idea! Preston screamed, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. 5 years ago at Thanksgiving, I said someone should make an app that helps people negotiate with debt collectors. You stole my intellectual property. I looked at my brother, feeling nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. You said, and I quote, there should be a Tinder for borrowing money. I replied evenly. That is not an algorithmic infrastructure for subprime debt consolidation, Preston. You do not even know how to use basic spreadsheet software. You stole it! Preston shrieked, his remaining composure completely disintegrating. He grabbed his hair, pacing frantically around the shattered glass like a caged animal. You took my vision, my manifestation. I built the conceptual framework for that entire company. Suddenly, Preston dropped heavily to his knees right in the middle of the dining room. He clutched his chest, hyperventilating dramatically, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I cannot breathe, he gasped, staring blankly at the ceiling. She is financially abusing me. She robbed me of my legacy. My mother rushed to her son, dropping to the floor without caring about her expensive dress. She cradled his head against her chest, looking up at me with eyes full of absolute hatred. Look what you have done to your brother. You stole his future. You always were a selfish, calculating little brat. Simone stood up, stepping between Preston and me like a human shield. Her therapy speak was now laced with venom. Bethany, what you have done is textbook narcissistic abuse. You have actively plagiarized your brother's intellectual labor. You are traumatizing him. You need to do the work to heal the family rupture you have caused. He is a 35-year-old man having a toddler's tantrum on the floor. Because I built a successful company, I stated plainly, not moving an inch from my chair. I did not steal anything. I worked 80-hour weeks for 5 relentless years. I pitched to venture capitalists while you two were busy taking out secondary mortgages to pay for his lavish destination wedding. My father stood up, his face a mask of desperate authority. Enough. We are family, and in this family we share our successes. If your company is worth $75 million, then a massive portion of that belongs to the family that raised you, the family that supported you, supported me. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You co-signed his loans. You paid his rent for a decade. You bought him a Tesla yesterday. When I asked for a $5,000 loan to buy servers to start my company, you told me I was fiscally irresponsible and needed to learn how to struggle. "We were teaching you independence," my mother screamed from the floor, stroking Preston's hair as he continued to fake a panic attack. And clearly it worked perfectly. "You owe us. You owe your brother for being your inspiration." Then the most miraculous thing happened. Preston suddenly stopped hyperventilating. He looked up from his mother's arms, his eyes narrowing with a dark, greedy calculation. 25 million, he demanded, his voice completely dropping the theatrical distress. I tilted my head, staring at him. "Excuse me, $25 million, Preston repeated, getting up from the floor and brushing the dust off his trousers. He pointed at me with sudden, aggressive confidence. "That is exactly 1/3 of your valuation. It is the absolute bare minimum for stealing my concept. You wire me 25 million by Friday, and I will not sue you for intellectual property theft. I will even graciously let you stay on as CEO of my company." Simone nodded vigorously, crossing her arms with an air of self-righteousness. "It is about accountability, Bethany. Paying Preston his rightful share is the only way to hold space for healing in this household." My father chimed in, stepping closer to me to loom over my chair. "Listen to your brother. 25 million is a fair settlement for keeping this mess out of court. You do not want a massive legal battle destroying your little startup right after you got your funding. Family looks out for family, Bethany. Do the right thing." I looked at the four of them. My father trying to physically intimidate me. My mother glaring at me with venomous entitlement. Simone weaponizing pop psychology to justify blatant extortion. And Preston standing there with his hand out, fully expecting millions of dollars to simply fall into his lap because he demanded it. For years, I had swallowed my pride. I had sat quietly at dinners listening to them praise Preston's failures while entirely ignoring my grind. I had watched them burn through their own retirement funds to keep up appearances for a son who refused to work. But right now, looking at the pure, unadulterated greed shining in their eyes, the last remaining thread of familial obligation finally snapped. I slowly stood up from my chair. I did not shout. I did not cry. I simply reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my car keys, and picked up my phone. "You really think you can sue me for $25 million based on a drunken conversation about Tinder for loans?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "I will ruin you," Preston spat, taking a threatening step toward me. "I will go to the press. I will tell your venture capitalists that you are a thief. You owe me everything." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said. I looked directly into my father's eyes. "And you, Dad? You want to talk about family, looking out for family. You want to talk about financial accountability. How about the fact that you secretly took out a second mortgage on this house to pay off Preston's massive gambling debts in Vegas, while telling me I was financially irresponsible?" My father's face turned beet red. "Do not you dare take that tone with me. You will wire that money by Friday, or you are no longer a part of this family." I smiled. It was a terrifying, ice-cold smile that made even Simone take a nervous step back. "Deal," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the dining room. "I am no longer a part of this family, and I am entirely done paying for it." I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room without a single backward glance. The heavy silence that had gripped the table instantly shattered into absolute chaos. My mother shrieked something unintelligible, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings and the ridiculous indoor waterfall my father had installed on credit 2 years ago. I kept my pace steady and deliberate, my low heels clicking against the imported Italian marble floors. My father shouted my name, demanding I come back and show some respect. Preston was yelling profanities, his voice cracking. With that same pathetic hysteria, he used to manipulate his way out of every consequence. Simone was probably trying to calm him down with deep breathing exercises, but I did not stay to find out. I walked past the grand staircase, past the walls lined with family portraits that prominently featured Preston holding various participation trophies, while I was conveniently cropped out or placed in the background. I reached the massive oak front doors. As I grabbed the brass handle, my mother came sprinting down the hallway. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my blazer. You walk out that door, you ungrateful coward, and you are dead to us, she screamed, her face twisted in rage. You will be begging us for forgiveness when Preston and his lawyers are done with you. You hear me. We will take every penny you have. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away immediately. I just stared at her fingers until she felt the sheer ice in my gaze and let go. You have already taken every penny you are ever going to get from me, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Good luck with the lawyers, Mom. Tell them to check the property deeds before they file the paperwork. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped out into the freezing winter night. The crisp, biting air hit my face, immediately clearing away the suffocating stench of roasted rosemary and stale entitlement. Behind me, my mother followed me onto the grand front porch, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold, refusing to let me have the last word. You will fail, she shrieked into the quiet suburban neighborhood, not caring which of their wealthy neighbors might hear. You think you are so smart because you got some lucky funding. You are nothing without this family. You will be back here crying when your little company goes bankrupt. I ignored her completely. I walked down the sweeping cobblestone driveway. The motion sensor security lights flickered on, illuminating the two vehicles parked side by side. On the left was the brand new Tesla Model S, plaid my father had just purchased for Preston, a $90,000 pat on the back for absolutely zero accomplishments. On the right was my sleek black Porsche Panamera, paid for in cash from the profits of my own relentless labor. I hit the unlock button on my key fob. The Porsche headlights flashed sharply, cutting through the darkness. I opened the heavy driver's side door and slid into the premium leather seat. The moment I pulled the door shut, the thick soundproofing instantly cut off my mother's frantic screaming. The silence inside the cabin was absolute and beautiful. I pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life with a satisfying deep growl, sending a slight vibration through the steering wheel. I sat there for a moment, gripping the leather, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. For 33 years, I had craved their validation. I had chased their approval, hoping that if I just worked hard enough, if I built something impressive enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Preston. But tonight proved what I should have known all along. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a resource. I was an ATM machine they could bully into dispensing cash whenever Preston messed up his life. I looked through the windshield. My mother was still standing on the porch, her mouth moving angrily as she gestured toward my car. She fully expected me to put the car in reverse, drive away crying, and wait for the inevitable lawsuit. She expected me to be terrified. Instead, I reached over to the passenger seat and unzipped my leather briefcase. I pulled out my laptop. I set it carefully on my lap, resting it against the steering wheel. I turned on my mobile hotspot, linking my laptop to the secure, encrypted network I used for corporate emergencies. I was not going to drive away just yet. I wanted to be right here, parked in their driveway, when I initiated the sequence. The screen glowed to life, casting a pale blue light across my face. My mother stopped yelling for a moment, squinting into the darkness, clearly confused as to why I was not leaving. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. I bypassed the public-facing interface of ClearPath Financial. I used my biometric authentication to log directly into the administrative backend. This was the master control panel, a highly restricted zone, accessible only to myself and my chief legal officer. To the public, ClearPath was just a helpful application that assisted users in consolidating and managing their debts. But that was just the shiny consumer front. The true engine of my company. The real reason venture capitalists had just valued us at $75 million was our aggressive back-end acquisition strategy. ClearPath was a predatory debt-buying firm. We purchased massive portfolios of distressed subprime debt from desperate lenders for pennies on the dollar. Then we used proprietary algorithms to restructure, collect, or liquidate those assets with ruthless efficiency. 3 years ago, ClearPath had acquired a massive bundle of toxic, unrecoverable debt from a shady subprime lender. When I had reviewed the algorithm's flagged accounts after the acquisition, a very specific address had popped up on my screen. The exact address of the sprawling suburban mansion I was currently parked outside of. My parents had co-signed the original mortgage. When Preston's early businesses inevitably failed, they had secretly taken out predatory shadow loans against their own retirement accounts to keep the mansion out of foreclosure. They had defaulted on everything. The bank had sold the toxic debt to ClearPath in a desperate attempt to recoup any losses. Technically and legally, my company owned Preston's house. My company owned my parents' remaining assets. For 3 years, I had committed the only act of irrational sentimentality in my entire professional career. I had gone into the system, found their specific debt profile, and manually applied a forbearance tag. That tag was an indefinite hold that blinded our collection algorithm. It froze the interest accumulation and blocked the automated eviction and foreclosure protocols from executing. My family had continued to live in their multi-million-dollar illusion, assuming the original bank had simply made a clerical error or lost their paperwork. They bragged at country club dinners about outsmarting the banking system. They were entirely unaware that the only reason they were not currently sleeping in a cheap roadside motel was because the daughter they relentlessly mocked was quietly absorbing the operational costs to keep their debt permanently frozen. I stared at the loading screen, waiting for the database to pull up the exact file. My mother finally turned around and marched back inside the house, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. She probably thought I was composing an apology email to Preston. She probably thought I was logging into my banking portal to prepare the $25 million wire transfer they demanded. The dashboard fully loaded. I typed their names into the search query. The file appeared instantly on my screen. I clicked to open the detailed financial dossier, my finger hovering perfectly still over the trackpad. They wanted a $25 million payout. Instead, they were about to get a masterclass in consequences. It was time to show them exactly what true financial independence looked like. The screen glared back at me, displaying the raw data of their financial negligence. The digital profile was a monument to their delusion. Debtor Howard and Brenda, cosigner Preston, status forbearance manual override. The numbers staring back at me were staggering. My father had leveraged every single asset he possessed to secure this specific loan, wrapping it in toxic subprime terms that guaranteed explosive interest rates if a single payment was missed. And they had not missed just one payment. They had missed 36 of them. For 3 whole years, they had lived inside this sprawling estate, completely rent-free. They hosted lavish dinner parties, bought luxury vehicles, and looked down their noses at anyone who worked a standard job. Simone filmed her daily lifestyle influencer videos in the marble kitchen, showing off a perfectly curated existence of generational wealth and abundance. She posted daily affirmations about financial healing, completely oblivious that the very roof over her head was legally owned by the sister-in-law she constantly belittled. I remembered hearing my father brag at a Thanksgiving dinner about how the banking system was run by incompetent fools who had simply lost their paperwork. He truly believed his own hype. He thought he had found a magical loophole in the matrix. He thought his undeniable charm and Preston's supposedly brilliant business acumen had somehow intimidated the financial institutions into backing down. They never once suspected that the invisible shield protecting their extravagant lifestyle was placed there by the daughter they relentlessly bullied. My cursor hovered over the bright green tag labeled Forbearance. This tiny digital marker was the only thing preventing the automated hounds of ClearPath Financial from tearing their lives apart. You stole his future. You owe him $25 million. You are no longer a part of this family. The sheer audacity of their extortion echoed in the quiet cabin of my Porsche. They wanted $25 million to forgive me for succeeding. They wanted to punish me for outgrowing the role of the quiet, obedient scapegoat. They genuinely believed they held all the power, wielding their conditional love like a weapon, threatening to cut me off if I did not finance Preston's failures. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the crisp air from the car's climate control fill my lungs. Then, with a single deliberate tap on the trackpad, I deleted the tag. The interface froze for a fraction of a second. Then the entire dashboard shifted from a calm, passive green to a blaring, critical red. The proprietary algorithm, suddenly unleashed after 3 years of forced blindness, aggressively attacked the account file. It worked with ruthless, terrifying speed. I watched the numbers spin upward like a slot machine hitting a jackpot of pure ruin. The system calculated the initial defaulted principal. It added 36 months of missed payments. It compounded the predatory penalty interest rates that my father had foolishly agreed to in the fine print. It tacked on severe delinquency fees, legal processing charges, and asset recovery margins. Within seconds, the total outstanding balance swelled to a catastrophic $1.2 million due immediately. But ClearPath's algorithm did not stop at the primary residence. Our software was designed to hunt. It immediately scanned public financial networks for any other assets tethered to the co-signers. The system flagged the secondary shadow loans my father had taken out just yesterday to purchase Preston's Tesla. Because those fresh vehicle loans were legally collateralized against the perceived equity of the already defaulted mansion, our algorithm invoked the cross-default clauses. Red alerts flooded my screen, stacking one on top of the other in rapid succession. Status updated, critical default. Arrears calculated 36 months. Protocol initiated immediate foreclosure and asset seizure. A profound sense of closure washed over me. I was not doing this out of blind, chaotic rage. I was executing a precise mathematical consequence. They had demanded independence. They had demanded a harsh lesson in financial reality. I was simply delivering it directly to their doorstep. The system was now automatically generating the eviction notices, the asset freeze requests, and the credit obliteration reports. It dispatched them instantly to the local county sheriff's department and the major national credit bureaus. I hit the final confirmation button, officially authorizing the automated legal protocols to proceed without any further human intervention. I closed the laptop. The satisfying snap of the lid echoed in the silent garage. I had just pulled the financial life support cord on my entire family. There would be no warning calls from friendly bank managers. There would be no grace period or opportunity to negotiate a payment plan. The algorithm was entirely merciless, and by Monday morning it would completely scorch the earth they stood on. I shifted the Porsche into gear and slowly backed out of the driveway. Through the rearview mirror, I took one last look at the brightly lit mansion. The indoor waterfall was probably still running. My mother was likely still fuming in the hallway, complaining to Preston about my toxic behavior. They were going to sleep tonight wrapped in expensive sheets, dreaming of the lawsuit they planned to file against me, completely unaware that the countdown to their total destruction had already begun. I pressed my foot on the accelerator and drove out of the neighborhood, the powerful engine purring smoothly beneath me. I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city, leaving their artificial world behind me in the dark. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the brushed concrete floors. It was Christmas morning, though you would never know it inside my apartment. I did not bother with festive decorations or forced holiday cheer. I preferred the clean, minimalist lines of my space. I stood at my marble kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee, watching the city below wake up. My phone resting on the counter next to my espresso machine began to vibrate. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of text messages. I leaned over and tapped the screen. The notifications were all from Simone. She had apparently spent her Christmas morning drafting a multi-paragraph manifesto of manipulation. I unlocked the phone and opened the chat thread. Simone had really outdone herself this time. Her messages were a masterclass in weaponized pop psychology, carefully constructed to sound enlightened while delivering pure extortion. Bethany, I am profoundly disappointed in your behavior last night, the first text read. Your inability to regulate your emotions and your decision to flee the space shows a severe lack of emotional intelligence. You are operating from a place of unhealed trauma and a scarcity mindset. A second bubble popped up immediately after. Preston is currently experiencing a severe dysregulation of his nervous system because of your actions. The children in this family need an aunt who models healthy sharing and community care, not someone blinded by capitalist greed. You have disrupted our safe space. Then came the final inevitable demand. Preston is willing to hold grace for your mistakes. Send the $25 million wire transfer by Tuesday to avoid traumatizing litigation. Do the work, Bethany. Choose family over profit. I read the text twice, letting the sheer audacity of her words wash over me. She was asking for $25 million while lecturing me about capitalist greed. She was using the hypothetical future children of this family as emotional leverage to fund her designer lifestyle. For a brief second, I considered drafting a response. I could have broken down her logical fallacies. I could have pointed out the hypocrisy of demanding a massive payout while preaching about community care. I could have told her exactly what the ClearPath algorithm was currently doing to her safe space. Instead, I kept my response perfectly aligned with the amount of respect I held for her. I tapped the keyboard, selected a single emoji, and hit send. A bright yellow thumbs-up icon appeared beneath her massive wall of text. I hit the lock button, silencing the notification thread, and tossed the phone back onto the marble counter. I took another sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast. While Simone was busy typing out her therapy speak ultimatums, the automated infrastructure at ClearPath Financial was executing its programming with flawless precision. Miles away in secure server farms, the digital gears were turning. The removal of the forbearance tag had unchained the collection protocols. The system was currently verifying the 36 months of accumulated arrears. It cross-referenced the defaulted mortgage against the property deeds filed with the county clerk. Once the validation was complete, the software generated a series of encrypted legal notices. Without a single human lifting a finger, the ClearPath servers fired off a cascade of red alerts to the local municipal authorities. Automated eviction requests were queued in the county sheriff's dispatch system. Official notices of foreclosure were transmitted directly to the public registry, permanently branding the suburban mansion as a distressed asset. But the algorithm did not stop at the property line. In the financial sector, debt is a contagious disease, and my father had carelessly exposed his entire financial ecosystem to the infection. When Howard originally co-signed the predatory shadow loans to keep Preston afloat, he had used his personal banking portfolio as a secondary guarantee. He had signed contracts containing standard cross-default clauses, which are legal tripwires designed to protect lenders if a borrower goes rogue. My father had ignored the fine print, assuming his wealth and status made him immune to the rules that governed ordinary people. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about the inflexibility of banking networks. As I finished my coffee, the ClearPath system pinged the national credit bureaus with a critical default status on the primary mortgage. The bureaus instantly updated Howard and Brenda's credit profiles. The moment their credit scores plummeted, the automated risk management systems at their primary banking institution kicked into gear. The bank's internal software detected the massive catastrophic default tied to Howard's Social Security number. It immediately triggered the cross-default clauses written into his checking, savings, and investment accounts. The banking network moved to protect itself from the massive financial fallout that was rapidly unfolding. Across the city in his velvet smoking jacket, my father was likely enjoying a lavish Christmas morning breakfast, entirely oblivious to the digital avalanche burying his empire. He probably assumed he still had millions in liquid assets readily available to hire a ruthless legal team to sue me. He probably thought he could simply write a check to solve whatever inconvenience Preston had caused this time around. He was wrong. The banking network algorithm severed his access in a matter of milliseconds. A digital lock clamped down on his checking accounts. His savings accounts were flagged and restricted. His revolving credit lines, the lifeblood of my mother's extravagant shopping habits, were instantly suspended. Every single account heavily collateralized against the now defaulted mansion was automatically frozen tight. The financial fortress my parents had spent decades building around themselves was effectively seized by the very system they thought they could manipulate. The traps had been sprung, the doors had been locked, and the key had been thrown away by a simple line of code. They were completely and utterly ruined, entirely cut off from the capital they intended to use to destroy me. By the time Monday morning arrived, the pristine headquarters of ClearPath Financial was humming with the electric high-stakes energy of our recent Series B funding announcement. The main lobby was a testament to modern corporate power, featuring soaring floor-to-ceiling glass walls, polished concrete floors, and digital tickers displaying real-time debt acquisition metrics across the walls. A group of highly influential venture capitalists dressed in their standard uniform of tailored slacks and expensive vests, were standing near the reception desk, taking a guided tour of the facility they had just poured millions of dollars into. I was standing in the corridor of the executive wing, reviewing a quarterly projection report, when the heavy glass security doors at the front entrance were forcefully shoved open. Preston and my father stormed into the lobby like a pair of rabid animals. They completely bypassed the security desk, ignoring the frantic protests of the receptionist. Preston looked entirely unhinged. His designer clothes were rumpled, his hair was a messy, sweaty disaster, and his face was flushed with a manic, desperate rage. My father trailed right behind him, his usual arrogant country club composure entirely replaced by wild-eyed, erratic panic. The reality of their frozen bank accounts and plummeting credit scores had clearly hit them over the weekend, and they were here to find a scapegoat. "Where is she?" Preston bellowed, his voice cracking and echoing aggressively off the acoustic ceiling panels. The sheer volume of his scream froze every employee in their tracks. "Where is the thief who stole my $25 million? Bethany, get out here right now!" My father pointed a trembling finger at a bewildered security guard who had stepped forward to intercept them. "I am the father of the CEO," my father shouted, trying to assert his patriarchal dominance in a room where he held absolutely no power. "You work for my daughter. I demand you take me to her office immediately. She has illegally locked my bank accounts, and I am going to have her arrested for cyber fraud." The visiting venture capitalists stopped their tour, exchanging shocked and confused glances. The entire main floor went dead silent, save for Preston's echoing rants about his stolen intellectual property and ruined future. I watched the circus unfold through the soundproof glass partition of the mezzanine. I felt no embarrassment, no shame, and no fear. I felt only a cold, clinical detachment. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, savoring the rich flavor. Then I pushed open the glass door and stepped out onto the open landing overlooking the lobby. "There she is!" Preston screamed, his eyes locking onto me. He rushed toward the security turnstiles, but was blocked by the reinforced glass gates. "You think you can just shut off Dad's credit cards? You think you can ignore my texts and get away with this? You owe me that money. I will tell every single investor in this building that you built this entire company on my stolen ideas. I will burn this place to the ground." I walked slowly down the open steel staircase, my heels clicking rhythmically against the metal steps. I stopped a few feet away from the security barrier, standing safely on the corporate side of the glass. I did not raise my voice. I did not frown. I simply looked at my brother and my father as if they were a bad investment portfolio I had already written off as a total loss. "Bethany," my father commanded using his deepest, most authoritative voice. It was the exact tone of voice that used to terrify me when I was a child. It held zero power over me now. "You will unlock my accounts right now. You will transfer the $25 million to your brother as we agreed on Christmas. If you do not fix this technical glitch immediately, I am calling the police and pressing federal charges against you." I took another sip of my coffee, maintaining absolute eye contact. "You are not experiencing a glitch, Dad. You are experiencing the consequences of defaulting on your heavily leveraged shadow loans. And you, Preston, are experiencing the reality of having no actual marketable skills." Preston slammed his fists against the glass turnstile, foaming at the mouth. "You arrogant little brat, I will destroy you. I will ruin your life." I did not flinch. I did not engage with his screaming, and I did not attempt to defend myself against his ridiculous claims. I simply turned my head slightly and gestured to the tall, sharp-suited man standing just a few feet to my right in the executive shadow. Elias, my chief legal officer, stepped forward. Elias was a shark in a tailored suit, possessing a brilliant legal mind and a complete, chilling absence of empathy for corporate parasites. He adjusted his silk tie with absolute predatory calm. He did not offer a polite family greeting. He did not introduce himself to my father. He simply walked up to the glass barrier, swiped his corporate keycard to open the gate, and stepped directly into Preston's personal space. Elias pulled two crisp, folded documents from his inner suit pocket. He shoved one forcefully into Preston's chest and handed the other directly to my father. Howard and Preston Elias, said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that carried effortlessly across the silent, staring lobby. You are currently holding formal, legally binding notices of trespassing. You have zero legal authority to be on this corporate property, and your presence here is a direct violation of state law. I am her father! Howard sputtered, gripping the legal paper as if it had burned him. You cannot do this! You are an unauthorized civilian aggressively disturbing a place of business, Elias corrected coldly, his eyes locking onto my father with merciless intensity. I do not care who you share DNA with. You have exactly 10 seconds to exit those glass doors voluntarily. If you do not, I will not call the police to settle a domestic family dispute. I will have you both arrested for criminal trespassing, corporate harassment, and making terroristic threats against a chief executive officer in front of 50 high-definition security cameras and a dozen high-net-worth witnesses. Preston opened his mouth to scream another threat, but Elias did not wait for him to speak. Elias raised his hand and snapped his fingers, once the sound cracking like a whip in the tense air. At his signal, the building's armed security detail, who had been quietly flanking the lobby perimeter, stepped forward in perfect unison. They rested their hands firmly on their utility belts, their faces hard and unreadable, fully prepared to physically drag the two men out of the building. My father's face contorted with a mix of disbelief and outrage. He puffed out his chest, stepping aggressively toward Elias, completely ignoring the armed security guards closing in around them. Do you know who I am? He roared, spit flying from his lips. I am Howard, her father. I raised that girl. I put the clothes on her back. I demand to be treated with respect, and I demand to see my daughter immediately. You are just a hired suit. Step aside before I have you fired. Elias did not move a single muscle. His expression remained entirely impassive, a mask of cold, corporate indifference. He looked at my father with the same detached assessment one might give a particularly stubborn stain on the pavement. You are not a father in this building, Howard Elias stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. You are a civilian with no security clearance, no appointment, and no legal standing. You are currently trespassing on private corporate property. Your demand for respect is legally irrelevant. You have 5 seconds left before security removes you by force. Preston, who had been momentarily stunned by the sudden appearance of armed guards, felt his fragile ego fracture completely. The realization that he could not bully, manipulate, or throw a tantrum his way out of this situation short-circuited his brain. He was so used to getting his way, so accustomed to my parents catering to his every demand, that being told no in such absolute, unyielding terms caused him to lose whatever thin shred of control he had left. You think you can talk to us like that? Preston screamed, his voice cracking violently. You think you can just hide behind your lawyers and your rent-a-cops? You owe me that $25 million. You owe me everything. Preston spun around wildly, his eyes darting across the sleek, modern lobby. He spotted a heavy, abstract bronze sculpture resting on a sleek display pedestal near the reception desk. With a feral, unhinged yell, Preston grabbed the heavy bronze piece with both hands. No, Preston! Don't, my father yelled, finally sensing that the situation had spiraled completely out of his control. But Preston was entirely consumed by his tantrum. He hoisted the heavy bronze sculpture above his head and hurled it with all his might toward the glass turnstiles, separating him from the executive corridor. The heavy bronze projectile slammed into the thick, tempered glass partition with a deafening, explosive crash. The reinforced glass did not merely crack, it shattered into thousands of jagged, glittering shards that rained down across the polished concrete floor. The explosive sound echoed violently through the massive lobby, causing several employees to scream and duck for cover. The venture capitalists who had been observing the drama with wide eyes physically recoiled, several of them pulling out their phones to record the chaotic scene. The sharp, terrifying sound of breaking glass completely shattered the remaining professional atmosphere of the morning. I did not flinch as the glass rained down just feet away from me. I simply watched my brother panting heavily, his face flushed with exertion and misplaced triumph as if throwing a tantrum and breaking things was an actual display of power. Elias did not even blink. He calmly reached into his suit pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped a single button on his screen. "You just committed felony vandalism," Preston Elias said, his voice entirely calm, almost conversational. "You destroyed thousands of dollars of corporate property. That is a direct escalation from criminal trespassing." Before Preston could even process the words, the shrill, piercing wail of police sirens cut through the morning air outside the building. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the remaining glass panels of the lobby doors. Elias had not been bluffing when he said the automated systems had alerted local authorities. The police were already en route the moment they entered the building, and Preston's violent outburst had just escalated the response. 4 uniformed police officers burst through the main doors, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "Security, secure the perimeter," the lead officer commanded, his eyes quickly scanning the shattered glass and Preston's aggressive posture. Elias stepped forward, presenting his corporate identification and the trespassing notices. "Officers, these 2 men were issued formal trespassing notices and refused to leave. The younger individual, Preston, just committed felony vandalism by destroying that partition. We are pressing full criminal charges." Preston's eyes widened in sudden absolute terror as 2 officers moved quickly toward him. "Wait, no, you don't understand," he stammered, backing away, his false bravado evaporating instantly. "She's my sister. This is a family matter. She stole my intellectual property. Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer ordered sharply, ignoring Preston's frantic excuses. "You are under arrest for destruction of property and criminal trespassing." "I'm not going to jail," Preston shrieked, struggling as the officer grabbed his arm. "Dad, do something. Tell them." My father rushed forward, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. "Officers, please. This is a misunderstanding. He was just upset." "I'll pay for the glass. I'll write a check right now. Just let him go." "Sir, step back immediately," the second officer warned, placing a firm hand on my father's chest and pushing him away. "If you interfere with an arrest, you will be joining him in the back of the cruiser." My father froze, his face pale and slack. He watched in helpless horror as the officers forcefully turned Preston around, pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs, snapping shut, echoed loudly in the silent, staring lobby. Preston, the golden child, the supposed entrepreneur, was roughly escorted out of the building in handcuffs. He was paraded directly in front of the visiting tech investors, his face red with tears and humiliation, crying out for our father to fix it. But Howard could do nothing but watch, entirely powerless, as his son was shoved into the back of a police cruiser, the flashing lights illuminating the total collapse of their arrogant illusion. Miles away from the shattered glass and flashing police lights of the corporate lobby, the sprawling suburban mansion sat in pristine, quiet arrogance. The morning sun filtered through the massive arched windows of the grand foyer, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the heated air. The ridiculous indoor waterfall hummed in the background, a constant expensive reminder of the artificial luxury my parents had wrapped themselves in. Brenda paced furiously across the imported Italian marble floor. She wore a silk dressing gown and clutched her smartphone with white-knuckled intensity. Her perfectly manicured thumb hit the re-download button on Howard's contact profile for the 7th time in 10 minutes. The call went straight to voicemail again. A sharp, frustrated noise escaped her throat. She had been trying to reach my father all morning, demanding an update on how he and Preston were handling my supposed insubordination. In her mind, her husband and her golden child were currently standing in my office, forcing me to wire the $25 million while I groveled for their forgiveness. She had absolutely no idea that her son was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs, facing felony charges. Upstairs, the faint sound of a ring light clicking on could be heard, followed by Simone's practiced, melodic voice. Simone was recording another one of her daily lifestyle influencer videos in the master suite. Her voice drifted down the sweeping staircase, echoing with toxic positivity. She was talking to her followers about manifesting abundance, doing the inner work, and protecting one's energy from toxic family members who refuse to hold space for community healing. Brenda rolled her eyes, momentarily annoyed by her daughter-in-law's constant performance. But she tolerated it because Simone's aesthetic fit perfectly into the wealthy narrative they projected to the world. Brenda marched into the massive chef's kitchen, pouring herself a glass of sparkling water. She was vibrating with a mixture of anger and eager anticipation. She had spent the entire weekend furious about my departure on Christmas Eve, convincing herself that my success was a direct insult to her parenting. She fully expected Howard to return home victorious by lunchtime. They would use the extorted money to pay off the few minor credit card debts they had, and then book a first-class vacation to Europe to recover from the trauma I had allegedly caused them. Suddenly, a deep, resonant chime echoed through the mansion. The heavy brass doorbell had been rung. Brenda's posture immediately relaxed. Her irritation melted into a look of eager expectation. She set her water glass down on the granite counter and smoothed the wrinkles from her silk robe. She had placed a massive overnight order with a luxury department store on Saturday morning, using one of her highest limit credit cards to self-soothe after the disastrous Christmas Eve dinner. She had purchased designer handbags, expensive shoes, and a vintage watch for Preston to calm his nerves. She assumed the courier had arrived with her expedited delivery. She walked confidently toward the front of the house. She swung open the heavy oak double doors, a condescending smile already forming on her lips, ready to instruct the delivery driver to leave the boxes in the foyer. The smile vanished instantly. There was no delivery truck in the circular cobblestone driveway. There were no packages. Standing on her front porch were two uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department. The lead deputy, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern, unreadable expression, had his hand resting near his duty belt. Beside him stood a civilian process server, holding a thick manila folder secured with a heavy red clip. Brenda froze, her hand gripping the edge of the heavy oak door. The sudden appearance of law enforcement on her immaculate porch short-circuited her brain. Her first arrogant thought was that I had somehow called the police to harass them. "Can I help you, officers?" Brenda asked, her voice dripping with defensive entitlement. "If this is about my daughter, I assure you she is a disturbed individual making false accusations. My husband is currently at her office handling the situation. You have no business being here." The lead deputy did not flinch. He looked down at a clipboard in his hand, verifying the address. "Are you Brenda, co-signer and resident of this property?" he asked, his voice entirely procedural and devoid of any warmth. "I am the owner of this property." "Yes," Brenda corrected sharply, lifting her chin. "And I demand to know why you are standing on my porch." The deputy gave a curt nod to the process server. The civilian stepped forward and thrust the thick manila folder directly into Brenda's chest, forcing her to take it or let it fall to the ground. "You have been formally served," the process server stated mechanically, taking a deliberate step back. Brenda looked down at the heavy folder in her hands, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its authoritative edge and pitching up in panic. "What are you handing me?" The deputy looked her dead in the eyes. "That is a court-ordered notice of accelerated foreclosure and an emergency writ of possession, ma'am. This property is currently in critical default. Your lender has successfully petitioned the county for an immediate asset seizure due to 36 months of non-payment and severe breach of contract." Brenda's jaw dropped. The blood rushed out of her head so fast she felt physically dizzy. "No," she gasped, shaking her head violently. "No, that is impossible. There is a mistake. My husband is a very wealthy man. Our bank made a clerical error years ago, and my son's business accounts cover all our expenses. You have the wrong house." "There is no mistake, ma'am," the deputy replied, his tone remaining absolutely flat. "The municipal court signed off on the digital execution orders an hour ago. We are here to serve the preliminary eviction notice." Brenda's hands shook so violently that she could barely open the folder. She ripped the red clip off and flipped open the heavy legal document. The bold black text at the top of the page seemed to scream at her. "Notice of default. Immediate foreclosure action." Her eyes frantically scanned down the page, searching for a number, a reason, a clerical error she could yell at someone to fix. Then her gaze locked onto the bolded financial summary. The breath was completely knocked out of her lungs. The document stated in undeniable legal terms that the primary mortgage and the heavily collateralized shadow loans had been accelerated. The total outstanding balance due immediately was $1.2 million. It included 36 months of back due principal compounding predatory penalty interest and severe delinquency fees. But the true horror was waiting at the very bottom of the page, highlighted in a bright, unforgiving yellow box. Due to the nature of the shadow loans and the critical length of the default, the lender had invoked an emergency seizure protocol. The document explicitly stated that all residents of the property had exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises entirely. If the property was not vacated within 72 hours, the county sheriff's department would return to physically remove all occupants and change all the locks. Brenda leaned against the heavy oak door frame to stop her legs from collapsing. The lavish multi-million-dollar mansion behind her suddenly felt like a massive collapsing tomb. The 72-hour countdown had already started, and she had absolutely no idea that her husband's bank accounts were entirely frozen, her son was in a jail cell, and the ruthless lender seizing her home was her own daughter. She snatched it out. The caller ID flashed Howard. Howard! She screamed into the receiver the moment she answered, her voice cracking with hysteria. Where are you? The sheriff was just here. They handed me an eviction notice. They said we have 3 days to leave the house. What is going on? Brenda, listen to me. Howard hissed, his voice a frantic, terrified whisper. I need you to come to the downtown precinct right now. The precinct. Brenda gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Why are you at a police station? Where is Preston? We are losing the house, Howard. Preston was arrested. Howard blurted out, completely ignoring her panic about the mansion. He lost his temper at Bethany's office. He broke a glass wall. They put him in handcuffs and took him away in a cruiser. You need to come down here and post his bail immediately. I left my wallet in the car when they dragged him out. Brenda felt her knees buckle. Her golden child, the supposed future billionaire of the family, was sitting in a holding cell. She shoved the thick manila foreclosure folder into her oversized designer handbag. I am on my way, she snapped. She did not bother with makeup. She threw an expensive cashmere trench coat over her clothes, grabbed her keys, and sprinted to her leased Mercedes SUV. She drove recklessly, breaking several speed limits as she navigated toward the downtown precinct. Her mind raced with a chaotic mix of fury and denial. Bethany had orchestrated this. Bethany had somehow hacked their accounts and called the police on her own brother. Brenda slammed her car into a visitor parking space and marched into the sterile, brightly lit police station. The stark contrast between her cashmere coat and the scuffed linoleum floors of the precinct made her look entirely out of place. She spotted Howard pacing near a row of plastic chairs, looking utterly defeated. Howard rushed over, grabbing her arms. Do you have your cards? He demanded, sweat beading on his forehead. Of course I have my cards, Brenda spat, ripping her wallet from her handbag. How much is it? $500, Howard whispered, looking around nervously, as if afraid someone from his country club might spot them. Just pay it so we can get him out of here and call our lawyers. Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes. $500. That was the cost of a casual Tuesday lunch with her socialite friends. She marched up to the bulletproof glass of the processing desk. The clerk, a bored-looking officer chewing gum, barely glanced up. I am here to post bail for my son, Preston, Brenda announced, sliding her heavy metallic platinum visa under the glass slot. Run it! I want him released immediately. The clerk took the card, swiped it through the terminal, and waited. A sharp, angry beep echoed from the machine. Declined, the clerk stated flatly, handing the card back. Brenda laughed, a sharp, condescending sound. That is impossible. That card has a $50,000 limit. Run it again. Your machine must be broken. The clerk sighed and swiped it a second time. Another sharp beep. Still declined, ma'am. Do you have another form of payment? Brenda snatched the visa back, her face flushing with indignation. She pulled out her prestigious black American Express card and shoved it under the glass. Here, use this one. And I want a receipt. The clerk swiped the black card. The machine processed for 2 seconds before emitting the exact same harsh rejection tone. Declined. Brenda froze. The blood drained from her face. She frantically dug into her wallet, pulling out a Discover card, a MasterCard, and a secondary bank debit card. She shoved all three under the partition. "Try all of them," she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "One of them has to work. We are extremely wealthy people." The clerk methodically swiped each card. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. Beep, account frozen. The clerk slid the entire stack of useless plastic back to her. "Lady, every single one of these accounts is locked. You need to step aside if you cannot pay." Brenda backed away from the desk, her hands shaking so violently she dropped two of the cards on the dirty linoleum floor. She turned to Howard, her eyes wide with sheer panic. "Howard, what is happening? Why are all my accounts frozen?" Howard grabbed her arm, pulling her into a secluded corner of the waiting area. His face was a mask of absolute terror. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground. "I checked my banking app on the way here." Howard choked out, his voice trembling. "It is all gone, Brenda. Everything is locked." "What do you mean locked?" Brenda shrieked, hitting his chest. "We have millions in credit." "No, we do not," Howard admitted, his voice breaking. "When I took out those secondary shadow loans to pay off Preston's gambling debts and buy that Tesla, I had to use collateral. I tied every single checking account, savings account, and unsecured credit line we have to the equity of the mansion." Brenda stared at him, the horrific reality of the foreclosure notice in her purse suddenly snapping into sharp focus. "The mansion is in critical default," Howard continued, wiping sweat from his face. "The moment the lender initiated the foreclosure protocols this morning, it triggered a cross-default cascade across the entire banking network. The banks panicked. They instantly suspended every single credit line we possess to protect their assets. We have zero liquidity, Brenda. We are completely locked out of the financial system. We cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now." Brenda leaned against the cinder block wall, gasping for air. Her platinum cards, her luxury cars, her sprawling estate. It was all an illusion, built on a fragile house of cards that had just been completely blown away by a single digital command. "We need $500, Howard pleaded, grabbing her shoulders. "Preston is sitting in a holding cell with actual criminals, Brenda. We have to get him out. Who can we call?" Brenda looked down at her dead credit cards scattered on the floor. She had alienated all her wealthy friends with her arrogance. She could not call them to beg for $500 to bail her son out of jail. The humiliation would destroy her social standing forever. There was only one person left to call. Brenda pulled out her phone, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she scrolled through her contacts. She hit the dial button and pressed the phone to her ear. 45 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the police precinct swung open. Simone marched inside. She was dressed in immaculate designer athleisure wear, holding a green smoothie in one hand and her sleek designer wallet in the other. Her face was a mask of cold, unadulterated fury. Simone spotted Brenda and Howard cowering in the corner. She did not offer a polite greeting. She did not use her usual therapy speak or wellness buzzwords. She marched directly up to her in-laws, her eyes blazing with suspicious rage. "I just left a manifestation retreat to drive to a police station," Simone hissed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You told me you are building generational wealth. You told me this family has an empire. So someone better explain to me right now why the supposedly wealthy in-laws I married into cannot even afford to pay a pathetic $500 bail bond for their own son." The ride back from the downtown precinct in Simone's Range Rover was suffocatingly silent. Preston sat in the passenger seat, nursing a bruised ego and rubbing his wrists where the heavy metal handcuffs had dug into his skin. Howard and Brenda cowered in the back seat, completely stripped of their usual country club arrogance. Simone gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had paid the $500 bail using her own business account, and her mind was racing with terrifying, unanswered questions. They arrived at the sprawling estate. Simone parked the car and marched through the heavy oak double doors, heading straight for the kitchen. Brenda followed closely behind, carelessly dumping her oversized designer handbag onto the massive granite island. The bag tipped over. A thick manila folder secured with a heavy red clip slid out, spilling its contents across the polished stone. Bold black letters caught Simone's eye immediately. Notice of default. Immediate foreclosure action. Simone snatched the papers before Brenda could grab them. "What is this?" Simone demanded, her voice razor-sharp and entirely stripped of its usual curated calmness. Preston scrambled forward, attempting to physically block her view of the documents. "It is nothing, baby. Just a massive clerical error. You know how incompetent these traditional banking institutions are. Bethany probably hired a hacker to send fake documents to the county just to scare us." Brenda chimed in, nodding frantically, her eyes wide with desperate denial. "Yes, exactly. We are multimillionaires, Simone. You know this. We have immense generational wealth. The bank just made a routing mistake with our diverse portfolio. It will be sorted out by tomorrow morning." Simone ignored their overlapping desperate excuses. She had built a brand on aesthetics and mindfulness, but she was not financially illiterate. She flipped directly to the summary page and read the unredacted truth. 36 months. Simone whispered, her eyes scanning the brutal, undeniable numbers. "You have not made a single mortgage payment in 3 years. Simone." "Listen to me," Preston pleaded, sweating profusely, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I own this house. I have massive equity built up. The banking algorithm just glitched. We are perfectly fine." "You own absolutely nothing!" Simone screamed, slamming the heavy legal document back onto the granite island with a deafening smack. "Your name is listed here as a co-signer on a subprime shadow loan." "A shadow loan, Preston. You do not have equity. You have a $1.2 million deficit. This legal document explicitly states that you have exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises before the county sheriff physically throws you out onto the street." Simone looked at her husband, then at her in-laws. The luxurious dinners, the designer clothes, the exclusive country club memberships. It was all a complete fabricated lie funded by predatory debt. She had married a man who had absolutely zero assets to his name. The vast financial empire he constantly bragged about building was a sinking ship, and he had secretly tied her to the heavy iron anchor. She felt a wave of pure, unfiltered panic wash over her. If she stayed married to Preston, his catastrophic financial collapse would inevitably bleed into her own credit score. Her brand, her influencer sponsorships, her carefully protected business accounts would all be seized by debt collectors to pay for his reckless gambling and Howard's fraudulent loans. Simone turned on her heel and sprinted up the sweeping mahogany staircase toward the master suite. Preston chased after her, tripping over his own ruined designer loafers in his desperation. By the time he reached the bedroom, Simone had already dragged 3 large Louis Vuitton suitcases from the massive walk-in closet and unzipped them violently on the king-size bed. She began throwing her expensive clothes, her jewelry boxes, and her professional camera equipment into the bags. She moved with ruthless efficiency. She was not crying. She was calculating her immediate exit strategy. "Simone, stop." "What are you doing?" Preston begged, hovering near the doorway, too terrified of her rage to step closer. "We can fix this. Dad will call his top lawyers. We are going to sue Bethany for $25 million, remember. We are going to be richer than ever. We just need to hold space for this transition." Simone zipped the first suitcase shut with a sharp, definitive sound. "You are not suing anyone, Preston. You are a broke, unemployed fraud who just got arrested for throwing a toddler's tantrum in a corporate lobby. You do not have lawyers. You do not have a company. You do not even have a bank account that can buy you a fast food burger right now." She hauled the heavy suitcases off the bed, grabbing her car keys from the nightstand. Preston dropped to his knees, resorting to the exact same fake panic attack he had used on Bethany just 2 nights ago. He clutched his chest, gasping for air, hoping to trigger Simone's empathy. But Simone was completely immune to his pathetic theatrics now. The veil had been lifted. "Get out of my way," Simone ordered, stepping right over his theatrical display without a single ounce of hesitation. I am leaving. And the very first phone call I make when I get into my car will be to the most ruthless divorce attorney I can find. I refuse to be legally tied to your catastrophic radioactive debt. Do not text me. Do not call me. Enjoy your eviction. She marched out of the mansion, the wheels of her Louis Vuitton luggage clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. Preston remained on the floor of the bedroom he no longer owned, sobbing genuinely as the heavy front doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. The heavy front doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. Preston remained on the imported Italian marble floor, sobbing into his hands entirely broken. Brenda stood frozen near the kitchen island, staring at her son. Howard was still at the police station, likely trying to bargain with an unyielding desk clerk using expired club memberships. They were utterly isolated. The 72-hour eviction clock was ticking loudly in Brenda's mind, a rhythmic drumbeat of impending doom. Brenda looked around the sprawling, echoing mansion. The indoor waterfall bubbled mockingly. The priceless artwork, the custom chandeliers, the endless square footage of unearned luxury, it was all slipping through her fingers. She had no credit cards, no cash, and no wealthy friends who would answer her calls once the news of Preston's arrest spread. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. But Brenda had survived for decades on manipulation, and a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. Her eyes landed on the tall ring light Simone had left behind in the corner of the living room. An idea sparked in Brenda's mind, fueled by sheer desperate malice. If Bethany wanted to play hardball using corporate algorithms, Brenda would fight back using the only weapon she had left, the court of public opinion. Brenda rushed to the nearest bathroom. She aggressively scrubbed her face with a wet towel, wiping away her flawless foundation and smudging her expensive mascara to create dark, hollow circles under her eyes. She tore the designer silk robe off her shoulders, replacing it with an old, faded cardigan she kept hidden in the back of her closet. She needed to look destitute, broken, and victimized. She needed to look like an elderly mother who had been brutally betrayed. She dragged the ring light into the center of the dark, cavernous living room and mounted her smartphone. She hit the record button. "My name is Brenda," she began, forcing a violent, racking sob into her chest. "And I am begging for help. My daughter Bethany, the CEO of ClearPath Financial, just became a multi-millionaire. But instead of sharing her success with the family who sacrificed everything to raise her, she has decided to destroy us." Brenda looked directly into the camera lens, letting a single, perfectly timed tear roll down her cheek. When her brother asked her for a small loan to help our family through the holidays, she retaliated. She used her corporate power to hack into our personal bank accounts and freeze our life savings. She framed my innocent son, having him arrested in front of dozens of people. And now she has falsified legal documents to illegally evict her elderly parents from our family home. We have less than 3 days before my own flesh and blood throws us out onto the freezing streets. She covered her face with her hands, crying loudly into the microphone. "Please, if anyone is watching this, share it. People need to know the truth about the monster running ClearPath Financial." Brenda stopped the recording, reviewed the footage, and smiled grimly. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She immediately uploaded the highly edited video simultaneously to Facebook and TikTok, utilizing every trending hashtag she could think of regarding corporate greed, elder abuse, and toxic billionaires. The internet algorithm, always hungry for outrage and scandal, picked up the video instantly. Within the first hour, the clip garnered 10,000 views. By the third hour, it had crossed 500,000. The digital mob mobilized with terrifying speed. Strangers who knew absolutely nothing about the reality of the subprime shadow loans or Preston's extortion attempts bought Brenda's performance hook, line, and sinker. They saw a weeping, desperate mother and a wealthy, heartless tech CEO. The narrative was too perfect for the internet to ignore. The outrage quickly migrated from the comment sections of Brenda's social media directly to ClearPath Financial's digital storefronts. The company's mobile app, which had proudly boasted a flawless 5-star rating just 24 hours ago, was suddenly bombarded. A coordinated review bombing campaign commenced. Thousands of 1-star reviews flooded the app stores in a matter of minutes. "CEO commits elder abuse," one review read. "Do not trust this company. They illegally evict elderly parents," read another. ClearPath Financial is run by a greedy sociopath. Boycott immediately. Inside the sleek glass-walled headquarters of ClearPath Financial, the celebratory atmosphere from the Series B funding had completely evaporated. The digital performance tickers lining the walls of the lobby shifted from tracking debt acquisitions to tracking the catastrophic plunge in user ratings. The public relations department was in a state of absolute panic, phones ringing off the hook with inquiries from financial journalists and local news stations demanding a statement regarding the viral video. The board of directors representing the venture capitalists who had just poured $75 million into the company called an immediate emergency meeting. Bethany sat at the head of the massive obsidian conference table. The investors appeared on the large video conferencing screens, their faces tight with corporate anxiety. They did not care about family drama. They cared about brand safety and market valuation. The viral video was a PR nightmare that threatened to taint their massive investment before the ink on the contracts was even dry. Elias paced the length of the boardroom. His tailored suit jacket unbuttoned his sharp legal mind, calculating the most efficient way to stop the bleeding. He stopped near Bethany's chair and placed both hands firmly on the table. The video is entirely defamatory, and we have the paper trail to prove it. Elias stated, his voice steady but urgent. However, the internet does not care about facts. They care about optics. Right now, the optics are terrible. We are hemorrhaging user trust by the minute. Bethany, we need to neutralize this threat immediately. What do you suggest? Bethany asked, her voice completely devoid of panic. We have two options, Elias advised, holding up two fingers. Option 1, I draft a brutal cease and desist letter. We threaten Brenda with a massive defamation lawsuit and force her to take the video down under penalty of financial ruin. Option 2, which the board might prefer, we settle privately. We pay her a small confidential nuisance fee, an amount completely insignificant to our bottom line, in exchange for a strict non-disclosure agreement and a public retraction. We buy her silence and save the company's image. The investors on the screens nodded in unified agreement. Throwing a few $100,000 at a noisy, problematic relative was standard operating procedure in the corporate world. It was clean, fast, and protected the valuation. Bethany looked at the screens, then up at Elias. She remembered the sheer malice in her mother's eyes on Christmas Eve. She remembered the years of gaslighting, the psychological torment, and the blatant extortion. Paying Brenda a single cent or hiding behind a legal gag order would only prove to her family that their manipulative tactics still worked. Bethany leaned forward, interlacing her fingers on the obsidian table. No, she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a diamond blade. Elias frowned. Bethany, we cannot let this narrative fester. The app rating is currently at 1.2 stars. I am not paying a blackmailer a nuisance fee, and I am not hiding behind a cease and desist, Bethany commanded, standing up from her leather executive chair. My mother wants the world to look at our family dynamics. She wants a public audience. I am going to give her exactly what she asked for. Bethany picked up her desk phone and dialed the extension for the head of her public relations department. She locked eyes with Elias, her expression completely ruthless. Call the major financial networks, Bethany ordered into the receiver. Tell the local news stations, the tech bloggers, and everyone who picked up that pathetic video. Set up a live press conference in the main lobby for 3 o'clock this afternoon. Prepare the cameras. We are going on the offensive. The main lobby of ClearPath Financial was completely transformed by 2:45 in the afternoon. The shattered glass from Preston's morning tantrum had been meticulously swept away, replaced by a sleek, transparent acrylic podium and a wall of high-definition digital monitors. The local news vans were parked haphazardly outside the building. Inside the room was packed shoulder to shoulder with financial journalists, tech bloggers, and camera crews. They were buzzing with eager anticipation, microphones poised, fully expecting a tearful, emotional apology from a young CEO who had buckled under the pressure of a viral social media mob. They wanted a reality television breakdown. Miles away, sitting in the sprawling, soon-to-be-seized living room of their suburban mansion, Brenda and Howard watched the live broadcast on their massive flat-screen television. Preston sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, biting his fingernails, still wearing the wrinkled clothes from his arrest. Brenda held a glass of tap water, pretending it was champagne, an arrogant, victorious grin plastered across her face. She leaned back against the cushions, absolutely certain that she had won. She firmly believed that Bethany was about to walk out to that podium, publicly apologize for the eviction, and announce a massive financial settlement to keep her parents quiet. At precisely 3 o'clock, I walked out of the executive elevator. I did not wear the apologetic, soft-tone clothing recommended by traditional public relations crisis managers. I wore a razor-sharp tailored black suit. I walked to the podium with absolute authority, Elias flanking my right side like a well-dressed executioner. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding strobe effect. The journalists immediately started shouting questions over each other, asking about my mother's tears, the eviction notice, and the allegations of elder abuse. I raised a single hand. The room fell entirely silent, the journalists leaning in to catch the apology. "Good afternoon." I began, my voice projecting clearly through the sound system, devoid of a single ounce of familial warmth or panic. We called this press conference today not to address baseless internet gossip, but to announce a revolutionary update to the ClearPath financial operating system. Today, we are officially rolling out our newest proprietary algorithmic feature, a behavioral tracking module designed specifically to detect, flag, and neutralize familial financial exploitation and shadow debt fraud. The journalists lowered their recording devices, slightly exchanging highly confused glances. This was not the groveling apology they had prepared their headlines for. I pressed a button on the podium console. The massive digital screens behind me flared to life. They displayed a complex, highly detailed financial flowchart. The names were heavily redacted, replaced with clinical legal labels, but the mathematics displayed on the screen were brutally legally accurate. For too long, the financial technology sector has ignored a massive vulnerability in subprime lending portfolios, I stated, stepping away from the podium to gesture at the massive screens. We call it toxic familial parasitism. To demonstrate the power of our new detection algorithm, I want to walk you through a highly specific, recently neutralized case study of an anonymous family. I pointed a laser pointer at the top of the flowchart. Let us look at debtor A and debtor B, two individuals nearing retirement age. They hold a primary mortgage on a luxury property. However, to fund the chronic gambling addiction, failed business ventures, and luxury vehicle purchases of their adult dependent, labeled here as Subject C, they engaged in severe financial misconduct. The camera crews zoomed in on the screens. The financial reporters began furiously typing on their laptops, their eyes widening as they absorbed the raw data being projected. Debtor A and debtor B secretly took out high-risk shadow loans against the equity of their primary residence. I continued, my voice echoing with clinical precision. They actively concealed these secondary liabilities from their primary mortgage holder. Furthermore, they falsified income statements to secure these shadow loans, inflating their liquid assets to maintain a lifestyle of fabricated generational wealth. When they inevitably defaulted, they attempted to extort the corporate entity that legally purchased their debt. I clicked the button again. The screen shifted to display the catastrophic fallout. The bold numbers flashed in bright red: $1.2 million in arrears, 36 months of complete non-payment. Our new algorithm automatically identifies this specific pattern of familial fraud, I announced, looking directly into the primary news camera, knowing exactly who was watching on the other side of the lens. It bypasses emotional manipulation. It ignores viral social media extortion attempts. It simply executes the law. In this case study, the algorithm successfully triggered an immediate cross-default cascade across the debtor's entire banking network, freezing their assets, initiating an accelerated foreclosure, and flagging Subject C for criminal wire fraud investigation. Back at the mansion, the victorious grin completely vanished from Brenda's face. The glass of tap water slipped from her hand, spilling across the expensive rug. Howard stood up, his face pale with absolute suffocating terror. They realized in real time that I was not apologizing. I was using their financial crimes as a marketing presentation on national television. In the lobby, a veteran financial journalist from a major network raised his hand, his eyes darting between the numbers on my presentation and his phone screen. He had just pulled up Brenda's viral video. The numbers matched the timeline. The locations matched. The dots connected in his mind with terrifying clarity. Madam C.E. Oh. The journalist called out, his voice cutting through the silent room. This case study. You are describing coordinated bank fraud and fraudulent loan applications. The woman in the viral video claiming to be your mother stated she was given a 72-hour eviction notice this morning. Are you confirming to the financial press that your immediate family is currently under investigation for federal wire fraud? I looked at the journalist with a perfectly practiced, chillingly neutral expression. ClearPath Financial strictly adheres to client confidentiality laws regarding specific defaulted accounts. I replied smoothly. However, I can confirm that our company actively reports all detected instances of shadow debt fraud to the appropriate federal authorities regardless of biological relation. We protect our investors first. We do not negotiate with financial terrorists. The room erupted into absolute bedlam. The journalists were no longer interested in a sappy family drama about a crying mother. They were looking at a massive multi-million-dollar federal bank fraud scandal orchestrated by country club elites who had just stupidly outed themselves on social media. Elias stepped to the microphone, seamlessly taking control of the chaos to conclude the press conference, while I turned and walked calmly back toward the executive elevators. I pulled out my phone and checked the live market trading application. The venture capitalists who had been panicking an hour ago were now actively celebrating. The stock market values ruthless efficiency above all else. By proving that I was willing to financially obliterate my own parents to protect the company's bottom line, I had just demonstrated an unparalleled level of corporate loyalty. The green numbers ticked sharply upward. ClearPath Financial's valuation was heavily spiking in after-hours trading. I stepped into the glass elevator and watched the doors slide shut, knowing that Brenda's pathetic sympathy campaign had just transformed from a public relations crisis into the laughingstock of the entire business world. The 72-hour eviction clock expired with zero fanfare shortly after my press conference concluded. I did not attend the actual lockout at the mansion. I had a company to run. But Elias received the confirmation email from the county sheriff's department precisely at 9 in the morning. My parents and Preston were officially escorted off the premises by armed deputies. They were forced to leave behind the custom furniture, the imported artwork, and the illusion of their generational wealth. With their credit completely frozen and no liquid cash to their names, they were reduced to renting a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, using the last remnants of Preston's hidden cash stash just to secure the lease. But people like my father do not accept defeat gracefully. Howard had spent his entire adult life believing he was the smartest man in every room. The idea that his daughter had financially outmaneuvered him was a psychological injury he simply could not process. Cut off from his country club lawyers, who all demanded massive retainers up front, my father grew desperate. He scoured the bottom of the legal barrel. He needed someone willing to work on contingency, someone hungry enough to chase a $75 million tech company with absolutely no upfront payment. He found Donald. Donald was a billboard lawyer, the kind of attorney who plastered his face on the side of city buses and promised massive payouts for slip-and-fall accidents. Donald did not care about the truth or federal wire fraud implications. He saw my rising net worth, looked at my desperate, angry family, and saw a quick payday. A week after the eviction, Elias walked into my corner office and dropped a thick, haphazardly bound legal folder onto my desk. He did not look concerned. He looked highly amused. "They are suing you," Elias announced, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite my desk. "It is a civil suit. They filed it under a legal doctrine called promissory estoppel." I picked up the document and scanned the absurdly dramatic legal jargon. "Promissory estoppel?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "According to this masterpiece of fictional literature," Elias said, leaning back and crossing his legs, "Howard and Preston are claiming that 5 years ago during a Thanksgiving dinner, you made a verbal contract. They are stating under penalty of perjury that they provided you with the foundational business advice and emotional support necessary to build ClearPath Financial." In exchange, they claim you explicitly promised to split all future corporate profits evenly with the family. 33% for you, 33 for Howard, and 33 for Preston. Since your valuation just hit $75 million, they are formally demanding $25 million in compensatory damages for your breach of this imaginary verbal contract. I dropped the folder back onto the desk with a sharp thud. A verbal contract from a Thanksgiving dinner where they actually told me my career was a joke. It is completely frivolous. A judge will throw this out immediately. Elias nodded in agreement. It is entirely frivolous. But that is not Donald's actual strategy. He is a settlement mill lawyer. He knows this case will never survive a courtroom trial. He is banking on the fact that you just secured Series B funding. He thinks you are terrified of bad optics. He assumes that a young tech CEO will want to avoid a messy public family lawsuit that might spook conservative investors. Elias pointed to the second page of the document. He issued a subpoena for a formal deposition. He wants to force you into a room, put you under oath, and have Preston and your father intimidate you. His entire game plan is to rattle your cage, make you panic about your corporate image, and manipulate you into writing a $2 million settlement check just to make them go away. It is a legal shakedown. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ridiculous lawsuit. My family had truly learned nothing. They still viewed me as the quiet, obedient girl they could bully into submission. They thought the threat of legal action would make me crumble. "We can file a motion to dismiss right now," Elias suggested, his tone shifting back to absolute professionalism. "I can have this thrown out by Friday, and we can countersue them for legal fees. They will be utterly bankrupted." I looked at the subpoena. A date and time were printed clearly at the bottom of the page. They wanted me under oath. They wanted a recorded transcript. They wanted to sit across a table and attempt to break me. "No," I said, my voice cold and calculated. "Do not file the motion to dismiss." Elias raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "You want to entertain this circus?" "I want them on the record," I corrected him. "I want them sitting in a room under penalty of perjury, swearing that they funded my life. I want them to officially document their financial claims. Accept the subpoena, Elias. Tell Donald we will be at the deposition." Elias stared at me for a moment, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face as he realized exactly what I was planning. "Understood," he said, picking up the folder. "I will prepare the exhibits." 3 days later, Elias and I arrived at a bleak, low-rent office building situated in a rundown strip mall. This was Donald's legal headquarters, a stark contrast to the sleek glass walls of ClearPath Financial. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. We walked into the cramped conference room designated for the deposition. A court reporter was already setting up her stenography machine in the corner, her fingers hovering over the keys. A cheap plastic table took up most of the space, surrounded by uncomfortable folding chairs. Sitting on the far side of the table was my father, wearing an old suit that no longer fit him properly. Next to him sat Donald, looking exactly like a man who expected to walk out of this room with a massive percentage of a settlement check. But sitting directly across from my designated chair was Preston. He wore a cheap blazer and a tie that was knotted entirely too tight. The moment I walked through the door, Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the plastic table. A massive, arrogant smirk spread across his face. His eyes gleamed with unearned triumph. In his delusional mind, the fact that I had actually shown up to this deposition meant I was terrified. He firmly believed he had finally trapped me under oath. He thought the $25 million was already his. I pulled out the flimsy plastic chair and sat down opposite my brother. Elias took the seat beside me, placing a massive, unmarked black binder on the table with a heavy thud that made the cheap plastic surface rattle. The court reporter positioned her hands over her stenography machine, her face an unreadable mask. A videographer in the corner adjusted his tripod, framing my face tightly in the lens. The little red recording light blinked on. We were officially on the record under penalty of perjury. Donald leaned forward, his cheap cologne barely masking the smell of stale coffee permeating the cramped room. He did not bother with professional pleasantries. He launched straight into a hostile theatrical performance designed solely for the camera. "State your name for the record," he barked. I did. Donald immediately began weaving his fabricated narrative, his voice booming aggressively in the small space. Bethany, we are here today because you have committed a gross violation of trust against the very people who built your foundation. Isn't it true that your parents, Howard and Brenda, sacrificed every ounce of their financial stability to ensure you had a comfortable life? Isn't it true they fully funded your university education, providing you the ultimate safety net required to develop your software application? I stared at him, my expression perfectly blank. No, that is entirely false. Donald slammed his hand flat on the table, trying to rattle me. Do not lie under oath. We have sworn testimony from Howard stating he liquidated his hard-earned assets specifically to support your technological pursuits. During a family Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago, did you or did you not explicitly promise to split the equity of your future corporate endeavors evenly with your father and your brother in exchange for their ongoing financial backing? I was never given a single dollar of financial backing. I replied, my voice steady and cold. And I never made any such promise. Preston scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest. You are perjuring yourself right now. Dad paid for everything. You lived completely off his dime while you sat in your dorm room writing code. You owe us. Elias calmly raised a hand, silencing Preston with a single icy glare. Counselor Elias said, directing his lethal attention to Donald. If your entire case for promissory estoppel rests on the absolute delusion that your clients acted as my client's primary financial investors during her university years, I highly suggest you review the actual financial disclosures before you embarrass yourself further on the legal record. Elias flipped open the heavy black binder. The sound of crisp paper turning was the only noise in the room. He extracted a thick stack of stapled documents and slid them firmly across the table toward Donald. Exhibit A. These are my client's certified W-2 forms, federal tax returns, and official university bursar receipts spanning her entire 4-year undergraduate education. Elias pointed a sharp finger at the highlighted lines on the top page. As the financial record clearly shows, Bethany paid her tuition in full, every single semester, through a combination of merit-based scholarships and grueling manual labor. She worked a graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner. She worked weekends at a retail electronics store. She took on freelance coding contracts during her brief hours of free time to afford her textbooks. Howard and Brenda contributed absolutely zero capital to her education. There was no financial sacrifice on their part to support her business. There is no financial dependency. Donald scanned the tax returns rapidly, his face flushing a deep, uncomfortable red. He looked over at Howard, who was suddenly avoiding eye contact, sweating profusely in his ill-fitting suit. However, Elias continued, his voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register. Since you brought up Howard liquidating his assets during that specific time frame, let us look at where that money actually went. Exhibit B. Elias slid a second stack of papers across the plastic table. These are subpoenaed bank statements from Howard's primary checking and savings accounts from exactly 5 years ago. You will notice several massive cash withdrawals frequently exceeding $30,000 a month. Elias then pulled out a third stack of glossy papers. And these are flight records and VIP hotel folios for your other client, Preston. Preston's arrogant smirk instantly vanished. The color completely drained from his face as he stared at the papers detailing his exact whereabouts. Elias tapped the documents sharply. The dates of Howard's massive panicked bank withdrawals align perfectly with Preston's extended stays at the Bellagio and the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Howard did not sacrifice his financial stability to fund a tech startup. He secretly mortgaged his own home to cover Preston's catastrophic baccarat losses. The only thing Howard funded was his adult son's crippling gambling addiction. The court reporter's fingers flew across the keys, capturing every single word of the devastating exposure. Howard buried his face in his trembling hands, entirely humiliated. Preston looked like he was going to be physically sick. He opened his mouth to argue, to deploy one of his usual manipulative excuses, but no words came out. The grand illusion that they were the benevolent benefactors of my success was completely destroyed on the legal record. They had sworn under oath that they paid for my life, and Elias had just empirically proved they were lying extortionists. Donald realized in an instant that his entire promissory estoppel argument was dead in the water. He was not going to get a cut of a $25 million settlement based on a fabricated Thanksgiving conversation. He grew frantic. He needed a new angle to justify the lawsuit and secure a payout for himself. His face turned a deep, angry shade of purple. He reached into his battered leather briefcase and aggressively ripped out a thick legal packet secured with a bright red clip. Donald stood up and slammed the packet onto the plastic table with maximum theatrical force. It was the emergency eviction and foreclosure notice the county sheriff had handed to my mother. "Fine," Donald shouted, pointing an accusatory finger directly at my face. "Let us talk about financial crimes. Let us talk about what happened exactly 72 hours ago." Donald leaned heavily over the table, staring at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "You want to play hardball? We are amending this lawsuit immediately to include malicious cyber fraud and intentional infliction of severe emotional distress. My clients were abruptly and violently thrown out of their family estate. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their credit was destroyed overnight, and we know exactly who is responsible." He tapped the foreclosure notice violently, his voice echoing in the small room. "You orchestrated an illegal, unauthorized hack into their primary banking institution. You unlawfully triggered a default cascade to evict your own parents and your brother as an act of petty, vindictive revenge. This document proves your malicious intent to destroy their lives." The accusation hung heavy in the stale air of the cramped conference room. Donald was breathing heavily, a triumphant sneer plastered across his face. He firmly believed his wild allegation of cyber fraud had finally cornered me. Before my lawyer could even respond to the ridiculous claim of corporate hacking, Preston decided he needed to be the star of this particular performance. He shoved Donald aside, planting his elbows aggressively on the table, and yanked the recording microphone directly toward his mouth. "It is completely obvious," Preston sneered, looking directly into the camera lens with absolute arrogance. "The traditional banking institutions are fundamentally incompetent. My entire financial portfolio was caught in a massive systemic glitch 3 years ago. The bank lost the administrative thread on my mansion. They stopped sending the statements. They froze the portal. It was a massive oversight on their end, and I was simply utilizing my legal rights to maintain my property, while they sorted out their own clerical disaster." Preston pointed a rigid, accusatory finger at me. "And then my jealous sister hires some underground hacker to break into the bank's mainframe. She weaponized an administrative error. She manipulated the system to force an illegal eviction because she cannot stand the fact that I built my own generational wealth without her." I sat perfectly still, my expression an impenetrable mask. I did not need to defend myself against unhinged accusations of hiring hackers. I did not need to shout or pound my fists on the table. I simply turned my head and looked at Elias. Elias did not object to the outrageous testimony. He did not interrupt Preston's wild monologue. Instead, Elias leaned back in his chair, a look of profound, chilling satisfaction settling over his sharp features. He held up a single manicured hand, gesturing for the court reporter to keep typing. "Let the record reflect the witness's voluntary statement," Elias said, his voice smooth as silk. He then focused his lethal attention entirely on my brother. "Let us ensure I fully understand your sworn testimony today, Preston. You are stating under penalty of perjury that the primary lender made a clerical error 3 years ago, correct?" "Exactly," Preston shot back, adjusting his cheap tie, clearly believing he was outsmarting a corporate lawyer. "They screwed up their own database." And because of this supposed glitch, Elias continued, his tone dangerously conversational. "You made the conscious, deliberate decision to withhold all financial restitution. You are confirming on the legal record that you have not made a single mortgage payment, interest payment, or property tax contribution in 36 consecutive months." Donald suddenly froze. The aggressive, blustering attorney realized a fraction of a second too late exactly what Elias was doing. The color drained from Donald's face. He reached out, grabbing Preston's forearm, trying to physically stop his client from answering the question. But Preston jerked his arm away, entirely blind to the legal trap closing tightly around his neck. He wanted the camera to capture his brilliance. "I am absolutely confirming it," Preston declared proudly, leaning closer to the microphone. Why would I pay a bank that cannot even keep track of its own assets? I put sweat equity into that estate. I maintain the physical property. Under the laws of adverse possession and administrative forfeiture, that house legally belongs to me. Bethany illegally hacked a dormant system to steal my rightful property. The frantic clacking of the court reporter's stenography machine filled the quiet room. Every single word of Preston's arrogant confession was permanently etched into the legal transcript. Donald buried his face in his hands, releasing a heavy, trembling sigh that smelled of stale coffee and impending malpractice. His client had just completely destroyed any hypothetical claim to the property. Preston had boldly confessed under oath to intentionally defaulting on a multi-million-dollar loan for 3 years. He had admitted to occupying a property without delivering a single cent of capital, annihilating any legal protection he might have claimed against a foreclosure action. My father Howard sat paralyzed next to Donald. The devastating reality of the situation was finally beginning to penetrate his thick layer of denial. Howard had spent decades navigating country club politics and corporate backrooms. He recognized the calculated, predatory gleam in Elias's eyes. He knew exactly what a corporate execution looked like, and he realized with sickening clarity that his golden son had just handed the executioner a fully loaded weapon. Howard opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps demand a recess or stop the recording, but his throat was completely dry. He was trapped in the room, forced to watch the collapse of his family's fabricated empire on high-definition video. "You have absolutely no right to evict us," Preston continued to rant, raising his voice to mask the sudden creeping doubt pooling in his gut. He was utterly oblivious to the sheer panic radiating from his own legal counsel. "You committed a federal cybercrime, Bethany. You hired malicious actors to alter bank records. When the presiding judge reviews this official transcript, you are going to federal prison. I am taking complete ownership of ClearPath Financial as punitive compensation for my severe emotional distress and the destruction of my property." I folded my hands neatly on the plastic table. I looked at the man who had tormented me for my entire existence. He was loud, he was aggressive, and he was completely hopelessly ignorant of how the modern financial world operated. He still believed he was the center of the universe, untouchable and protected by his own manufactured reality. Elias sat forward, resting his forearms deliberately on the cheap table. The casual conversational tone he had used to bait the trap completely vanished. It was instantly replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of undeniable corporate power. Preston, Elias said, his voice slicing through the stuffy room like a surgical scalpel. "You seem to be operating under the severe, almost comical delusion that traditional banking institutions simply forget about million-dollar assets. You believe that massive financial conglomerates misplace the deeds to luxury suburban estates. Banks do not lose paperwork. Banks do not experience 3-year administrative glitches. When an asset becomes entirely toxic, when a debtor proves to be a catastrophic non-performing liability, the bank does not forget about the debt." Elias paused, letting the cold reality sink into the room. "The bank sells the debt." Preston's arrogant smirk finally fractured. The aggressive posture dissolved, replaced by a sudden nervous twitch in his jaw. His brow furrowed in genuine terrified confusion. "What are you talking about? Sells the debt to who?" Elias reached into the heavy black binder one final time. He did not pull out a tax return or a personal bank statement. He extracted a thick, professionally bound legal contract, stamped heavily with a gold corporate seal and authenticated by the State Financial Regulatory Commission. Elias slid the heavy document slowly across the center of the plastic table. The thick packet of paper came to a definitive stop directly in front of Donald. "Counselor," Elias commanded softly, his eyes never leaving my brother, "I strongly suggest you read the primary acquisition clause on page 4 aloud to your client." Donald's hands visibly shook as he picked up the bound contract. His eyes frantically scanned the dense, irrefutable legal text. His jaw dropped open. A soft, terrified gasp escaped his lips as he realized the absolute magnitude of the mistake they had made by initiating this lawsuit. Elias smiled cleanly, folding his hands together. Let us talk about this so-called systemic glitch. Donald stared at the heavy vellum pages, his eyes darting frantically back and forth across the densely packed legal text. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, providing the only sound in the suffocating silence of the cramped deposition room. Sweat beaded heavily on Donald's forehead, rolling down his temple and soaking into his cheap fraying collar. He swallowed audibly, a dry clicking sound that amplified the unbearable tension. His hands shook so violently that the crisp pages rustled loudly against the plastic table. He leaned over to Preston. He brought his mouth close to Preston's ear, whispering in a frantic, desperate cadence. The recording microphone caught the sharp, panicked hisses of his breath, though the exact words were muffled. Preston physically recoiled, looking at his own lawyer, as if the man had just spoken in tongues. "What are you talking about?" Preston demanded, his voice rising in sudden, uncontrollable panic. "Speak English, Donald. What does the paper say? Tell me what it says." Donald refused to look at him. He shoved his folding chair back aggressively, distancing himself from his own client. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table, bypass the locked door, and disappear into the hallway forever. He knew his career was effectively over. Preston snatched the thick document from the table. He stared at the bold corporate headings, the authenticated state financial seals, and the impenetrable walls of high-level legal jargon. He flipped the pages aggressively, searching for a summary, a loophole, anything his untrained, arrogant mind could comprehend. "It is just corporate garbage," Preston scoffed, slamming the packet down, though his voice wavered with undisguised terror. "It is a fake contract. You mocked this up to scare us. This means nothing." I leaned forward, pulling the recording microphone directly toward me. I rested my forearms on the table, my posture completely relaxed, a stark contrast to the sheer panic radiating from the men sitting across from me. "The bank did not make a mistake, Preston," I said, my voice echoing through the small room with absolute, unyielding clarity. 3 years ago, the original lender realized your heavily leveraged shadow loans were entirely toxic. They flagged your portfolio as a catastrophic, non-performing liability. They packaged your debt along with thousands of other severely defaulting accounts and sold them to the highest bidder at a subprime liquidation auction. Preston stopped flipping the pages. He froze entirely. He stared at me, his eyes wide, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "ClearPath Financial purchased that entire portfolio," I continued, enunciating every single syllable for the court reporter. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of ClearPath Financial. I own the proprietary algorithms that manage those acquired assets. I hold the ultimate executive authority over every single account in that database. Do you understand what I am telling you, Preston? I am your bank." My father Howard let out a strangled, agonizing sound from the back of his throat. He slumped down heavily in his plastic chair, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a fragile, terrified old man. The devastating reality of the situation had finally breached his impenetrable wall of suburban arrogance. He understood exactly what I had done. "You are lying," Preston shouted, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You do not own my house. You do not have the capital." "I own the commercial paper that dictates who gets to live in that house," I corrected him coldly. "For 36 consecutive months, you have been living in a multi-million-dollar estate completely free of charge. You thought you were a financial genius. You thought you had somehow outsmarted a multi-billion-dollar banking conglomerate. You bragged to everyone at your country club about finding a loophole in the system, but the only reason you were not physically thrown onto the street 3 years ago by armed deputies is because I manually logged into the ClearPath administrative system and placed an indefinite forbearance hold on your specific digital file." Preston opened his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked at Elias, then at Donald, begging for someone to object to call me a liar, to stop the systematic recorded destruction of his reality. Neither lawyer moved a muscle. "I personally absorbed the operational cost to keep your debt frozen," I stated, staring dead into his terrified, unblinking eyes. I actively shielded your account from the automated collection protocols. I protected my parents from the immediate cross-default cascade that would have obliterated their entire financial ecosystem years ago. I gave you 3 years of absolute grace to get your life together, find a legitimate job, and become a functioning adult. I paused, letting the crushing, suffocating weight of his monumental stupidity settle heavily over his shoulders. And how exactly did you repay that grace, I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal, chilling whisper. You invited me to a Christmas dinner just to mock my career trajectory. You called me a selfish, calculating brat. You threw a literal tantrum on the dining room floor. And you explicitly demanded that I wire you $25 million to compensate you for a drunken conversation you barely remember. Preston began to hyperventilate. His breaths came in short, jagged, desperate gasps. He gripped the edge of the cheap plastic table, his knuckles turning pure white as his body shook. The absolute staggering magnitude of his catastrophic miscalculation was finally crushing his chest. He had brought a frivolous lawsuit against the very entity holding his entire existence together. When you demanded $25 million from me on Christmas Eve, I continued, my voice entirely devoid of mercy or hesitation. I realized you would never change. I realized my silent protection was only enabling your massive delusion. So I walked out to my car, opened my laptop, and I simply stopped paying your bills. I deleted the forbearance tag. I let the algorithm completely off the leash. I stood up from the table, calmly buttoning my tailored blazer. I looked down at the broken, hyperventilating man who had tormented me for my entire existence. You sued the only person on this entire planet who was actively protecting you from absolute ruin, I said, staring dead into his terrified eyes. Have a nice time on the streets, Preston. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy wooden door. Behind me, the sound of Preston desperately gasping for air filled the silent room, the terrifying, pathetic symphony of a man realizing he had just completely and irrevocably destroyed his own life. The news of the disastrous deposition leaked through the legal community with the speed of a wildfire. Donald, realizing he had been tricked into facilitating a recorded confession of intentional loan default, dropped my father and brother as clients before the ink on the transcript was even dry. By Wednesday afternoon, the court reporter's certified file had made its way into the hands of the divorce attorneys Simone had aggressively retained. Those lawyers, searching for any hidden assets they could liquidate for their client, took one look at Preston's sworn testimony and immediately delivered the fatal blow. Preston had zero equity. He had massive radioactive debt. The generational wealth he had promised Simone was a complete, verifiable hallucination. I walked out of the ClearPath Financial private elevator and stepped into the underground executive parking garage. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive motor oil and damp concrete. The sharp click of my heels echoed rhythmically against the structural pillars. I was exhausted, but running on the pure, unfiltered adrenaline of absolute victory. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob, and the sleek headlights of my Porsche Panamera flashed in the dim fluorescent lighting. Before I could even reach the driver's side door, a figure stepped out from behind a massive concrete support column. "Bethany, please wait." I stopped in my tracks, my hand hovering inches from the door handle. Simone stood trembling in the harsh garage lighting. The transformation was entirely jarring. The flawless, serene lifestyle influencer I had seen on Christmas Eve was completely gone. She was not wearing a tailored designer suit or an immaculate silk blouse. She wore oversized sweatpants and a dark, shapeless hoodie. Her natural hair, usually styled into absolute perfection, was pulled back into a hasty, messy bun. There was no ring light, no curated aesthetic, no aura of profound spiritual healing. There was only raw, unadulterated panic. "How did you get down here?" I asked, my voice flat, showing zero surprise or intimidation. "This level requires keycard access." I waited by the exit ramp. Simone admitted, her voice shaking violently. Her breath hitched in her throat. "I slipped under the gate when one of your executives drove out. I have been standing in the cold for 3 hours. I had to see you. I had to talk to you face to face." I did not move toward her. I stood firmly beside my car, my posture radiating total corporate indifference. You have exactly 2 minutes before I press the panic button on my keys and building security physically throws you onto the street. Speak quickly. Simone took a hesitant step forward, raising her hands in a desperate, placating gesture. All of the weaponized therapy jargon she used to manipulate my family had completely vanished. She was no longer preaching about emotional intelligence or holding space for community care. The realization that she was about to be homeless had stripped away the pretentious vocabulary entirely. Bethany, I am begging you. Simone cried, tears immediately spilling over her eyelashes and running down her cheeks. You have to understand my position. I did not know about the shadow loans. I did not know Preston was broke. He lied to me. Howard lied to me. They sold me a dream of financial stability, and I believed them. I checked my watch, a deliberate, dismissive gesture. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds left, Simone. Ignorance of your husband's financial illiteracy is not a valid legal defense. Simone sobbed loudly, wrapping her arms around her stomach as if she were in physical pain. Please, Bethany, look at me. Look at what this is doing. I am a Black woman who fought tooth and nail to climb out of a system designed to keep me at the bottom. I married Preston because I thought he represented a safe, secure future for the family I wanted to build. I thought I was securing a legacy. If you follow through with this eviction, you are throwing me right back into the cycle of struggle I worked my entire life to escape. She took another step closer, her voice growing increasingly frantic. She was pulling every single emotional lever she could find, hoping one would finally break my resolve. Think about the future, Bethany, Simone pleaded, her voice cracking with raw desperation. Think about the children I plan to have. Preston's children. Your future nieces and nephews. How can you condemn them to a life of poverty before they are even born? You are a multimillionaire. You have a massive company. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. I am just asking for the deed to the mansion. Just sign the house over to me. Let me keep the property so I do not have to start from absolute zero. It is a drop in the bucket for you, but it is my entire world. I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. She was not apologizing for her cruelty. She was not apologizing for demanding $25 million from me just a few days ago. She was simply using her racial identity and the hypothetical existence of unborn children to guilt me into handing her a multi-million-dollar real estate asset for free. She wanted me to reward her complicity in my family's abuse just so she could maintain her wealthy influencer aesthetic. I reached for the heavy door handle of my Porsche and pulled it open. You told me to hold space for accountability, I said, my voice slicing through the damp garage air like a diamond blade. I am. The kids will be fine, Simone, but you need to teach them how to work because they certainly won't learn it from Preston. Bethany, no. Please, Simone shrieked, lunging forward, reaching out as if to physically grab my tailored blazer. Do not do this to me. You owe us a chance. I slid smoothly into the driver's seat and pulled the heavy door shut, the thick soundproofing instantly severing her frantic screams. I pressed the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl. Through the reinforced glass, I watched Simone banging her hands against my window, her face twisted in an ugly mask of sheer desperation and entitlement. I put the car in drive. I did not look at her again. I pressed the button on the center console, rolling up my window, tightly sealing out the noise of her collapsing reality. I hit the accelerator and drove smoothly up the concrete ramp, leaving her standing entirely alone in the dim, cold parking garage, holding nothing but the catastrophic consequences of her own terrible choices. I drove out of the underground garage, the morning sun reflecting off the sleek hood of my car. I left Simone to her manufactured victimhood and headed straight back to the executive suite. I had a company to run, and the market was responding beautifully to my press conference. But Elias, my chief legal officer, was not quite finished dissecting the carcass of my family's financial empire. When I walked into my office, Elias was already sitting at the massive obsidian conference table. He had 2 large stacks of paper spread out before him. On the left was the certified, officially stamped transcript from yesterday's disastrous deposition. On the right was the original digital loan origination file that ClearPath Financial had acquired when we bought my family's toxic debt portfolio. Elias looked up, his eyes gleaming with that familiar predatory sharpness. "Preston is an absolute idiot," Elias stated, his voice completely flat. He was so eager to sound like a financial mastermind on the legal record that he completely forgot what lies he told to secure the money in the first place. I sat down, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee from the carafe on the table. "What did you find?" I asked. Elias pushed a highlighted page of the deposition transcript toward me. During the hearing, Preston swore under penalty of perjury that his businesses were completely defunct for the past 36 months. He admitted he had zero incoming revenue and relied entirely on Howard to subsidize his living expenses while he claimed adverse possession of the estate. Elias then slid a second document across the table. It was a loan application from 3 years ago, signed by Preston and co-signed by Howard. "Take a look at his stated income on the origination documents for the shadow loans," Elias commanded. I scanned the page. Preston had submitted W-2 forms claiming an annual executive salary of $600,000 from a shell corporation. Howard had signed the guarantor section formally verifying that the shell corporation held millions in liquid capital. "They fabricated the entire corporate structure," Elias said smoothly. Preston forged the W-2s. Howard falsified the asset verification forms to bypass the subprime lender's risk assessment algorithms. They knowingly transmitted fraudulent financial documents across state lines to secure a multi-million-dollar loan. I looked up at Elias. "That is not just a breach of contract." "No." Elias agreed, a shark-like smile appearing on his face. "That is a textbook violation of federal law, specifically Title 18 United States Code, Section 1343, wire fraud. And since it involves a federally insured banking network cascade, it also triggers severe bank fraud statutes." "What is our corporate obligation?" I asked, keeping my tone strictly professional. "As the current legal owners of the debt portfolio, we are bound by federal compliance regulations," Elias replied, already packing the documents into a sleek leather folder. "If we discover overt financial fraud within our acquired assets, we are legally mandated to report it to the authorities. Failing to do so makes us complicit in concealing a federal crime." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warm caffeine settle my nerves. "Then fulfill our corporate compliance obligations, Elias. Send it all." Elias did not waste a single second. He compiled the deposition transcripts, the forged W-2s, the falsified asset declarations, and the network transmission logs into a highly detailed digital dossier. He bypassed local law enforcement entirely. He submitted the comprehensive package directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the White Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 48 hours later, the crushing weight of federal justice descended on Preston. He was no longer living in a multi-million-dollar mansion. He was renting a cramped, dingy short-term apartment in a notoriously rough neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, using the absolute last of his hidden cash reserves. It was 6 in the morning. Preston was likely sleeping on a cheap, sagging mattress, dreaming of ways to beg Simone to take him back. He was brutally awakened by a sound he had never heard outside of television shows. A heavy tactical battering ram smashed into the flimsy front door of his apartment. The door splintered into a dozen pieces and flew off its hinges, crashing violently against the cheap drywall. A dozen federal agents wearing tactical gear and heavy Kevlar vests swarmed into the tiny living room, their heavy boots shaking the floorboards. "FBI, get on the ground right now!" The lead agent roared, his weapon drawn, and pointed directly at the bedroom door. Preston stumbled out of the bedroom wearing only his boxers, screaming in absolute terror. The sudden, overwhelming violence of the raid completely shattered his fragile reality. He dropped to the filthy carpet, sobbing uncontrollably as heavily armed agents pinned his arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp, tight snap of federal handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the small, chaotic apartment. An agent pulled him roughly to his feet, reading him his Miranda rights as they marched him out the door. He was formally placed under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. There would be no bail paid by his parents this time. There would be no high-priced country club lawyers rushing to his defense. He was stepping into the federal criminal justice system entirely alone and completely destitute. At that exact same moment across town, in a similarly depressing rental unit, another team of federal agents was violently pounding on my father's front door. The loud, authoritative knock signaled the absolute end of his carefully curated existence. Howard was officially implicated as a co-conspirator in a massive federal fraud ring. The arrogant patriarch who had proudly demanded $25 million from me just days ago was now being dragged out of his home in handcuffs, facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Following their humiliating arrests and a chaotic federal arraignment, Howard and Preston managed to secure a heavily restricted pretrial release. They were stripped of their passports, fitted with bulky GPS ankle monitors, and released into a world that wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. They had avoided waiting for their trial inside a federal holding cell, but they could not avoid the absolute destruction of their physical empire. The 72-hour eviction countdown had officially expired. The county sheriff's department had moved in swiftly and without mercy. They changed every lock on the heavy oak doors, secured the perimeter, and erected a temporary auction podium right on the sweeping cobblestone driveway. Because of the high-profile nature of the defaults and the complex web of toxic shadow loans attached to the property, the county opted for a public foreclosure auction right on the premises. It was a brutal public spectacle designed to liquidate the asset as fast as legally possible. I arrived at the estate just as the morning frost was beginning to melt off the manicured lawns. I did not park in the driveway, as that was now county property. I parked my black Porsche Panamera right on the street directly behind a line of vehicles belonging to aggressive real estate developers and bottom-feeder property investors who had come to pick over the bones of my family's fabricated wealth. I stepped out of the car wearing a sharp-tailored wool trench coat and dark sunglasses. The crisp winter air hit my face, but I felt entirely warm, fueled by the absolute clarity of my purpose. I walked toward the towering wrought iron front gates, standing on the cold concrete sidewalk, physically barred from entering the property they had once ruled, were my parents and my brother. The visual contrast from our Christmas Eve dinner was staggering. Brenda was wearing a faded, off-the-rack coat, her hair flat and unstyled. She looked completely hollowed out, staring blankly through the iron bars at the indoor waterfall she used to brag about. Preston stood beside her, shivering in the cold, the blinking light of his federal ankle monitor visible beneath the hem of his cheap jeans. He looked like a terrified, broken child. Howard was pacing back and forth, his shoulders slumped, his face unshaven and gray with defeat. They noticed me approaching. Preston visibly flinched, taking a step backward behind my mother. Brenda refused to meet my eyes, opting to stare at the pavement in profound shame. Howard stopped pacing. He looked at me, a flicker of desperate, pathetic hope igniting in his tired eyes. He actually believed I had come to save them at the 11th hour. He thought I was there to write a massive check to the county, halt the auction, and restore them to their rightful thrones. I did not even acknowledge their presence. I walked right past them, stepping up to the velvet rope that separated the public sidewalk from the active auction zone. I pulled a numbered bidding paddle from my coat pocket. I had pre-registered for this event through my personal wealth management firm. I was not hiding behind Elias or a corporate proxy today. I wanted them to see exactly who was holding the executioner's axe. The county auctioneer stepped up to the podium, tapping his microphone to grab the attention of the developers milling about the driveway. He read the legal description of the property, followed by a long, exhausting list of the toxic encumbrances attached to the deed. He detailed the massive subprime defaults, the unresolved federal liens tied to the wire fraud investigation, and the staggering property tax arrears. Because the property was drowning in radioactive debt, it was a massive liability for any traditional buyer. The cash value of the estate had completely plummeted. It was worth mere pennies on the dollar. The auctioneer called for the starting bid. A developer in a cheap suit raised his paddle, offering a laughably low amount, hoping to steal a multi-million-dollar mansion for the price of a small suburban condo. I smoothly raised my paddle. I instantly doubled his bid. The developer turned and glared at me, He raised his paddle again, adding $50,000 to the pot. I did not hesitate. I raised my paddle and added another $500,000, tossing the massive sum into the air, with the casual indifference of someone buying a cup of coffee. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of investors. They recognized predatory corporate dominance when they saw it. They knew immediately that I had bottomless capital and was entirely willing to outspend every single person in the driveway just to make a point. The developer shook his head in disgust, lowered his paddle, and walked away. No one else dared to raise their hand. Going once, the auctioneer called out, his voice echoing across the silent estate. Going twice, sold to the bidder in the black coat. The heavy gavel slammed down against the wooden podium. The sharp, definitive crack signaled the absolute permanent transfer of power. I now personally own the mansion wiped completely clean of the toxic debt my company previously held. I had bought my childhood trauma for loose change. Behind me on the sidewalk, the remaining fragments of my father's pride completely shattered. Howard broke down. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded absolute submission from me his entire life began to openly, loudly sob on the public street. He stumbled forward, his hands gripping the cold, wrought iron bars of the gate. "Bethany," he cried out, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "Bethany, please, you have your company, you have your revenge, you have the main house now. I am begging you. Just let your mother and me move into the guest house out back. We have absolutely nowhere to go. We have zero money. We will maintain the grounds. We will stay out of your way. Please just give us the guest house. Do not leave us on the streets." I slowly turned around. I took off my dark sunglasses and looked directly into my father's red, tear-streaked eyes. I saw the total humiliation, the pathetic, groveling desperation of a man who had finally realized he was entirely at my mercy. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. I did not smile. I did not even grant him the dignity of a verbal rejection. Instead, I turned away from him completely. I signaled to a man standing quietly near the auction podium. It was my lead demolition and renovation contractor, dressed in a high-visibility vest and holding a heavy clipboard. He stepped forward quickly, retrieving the newly finalized property keys and the deed transfer paperwork from the county clerk. I took the heavy brass keys from the clerk and held them in my hand for a brief second, feeling the cold metal. Then, ignoring my father's frantic, sobbing pleas echoing from the sidewalk, I handed the keys directly to my contractor. "Gut the entire interior by Monday," I commanded, my voice carrying clearly over my father's weeping. "And tear down that ridiculous guest house first. I want it completely leveled before sunset." The contractor nodded sharply, his face breaking into a wide, eager grin. He turned and immediately began signaling his demolition crew. The deafening roar of a heavy diesel excavator engine flared to life violently, drowning out the pathetic, lingering sounds of my father crying on the public sidewalk. I did not stay to watch the first swing of the wrecking ball. I had already witnessed the true destruction of this family weeks ago. The physical dismantling of their property was simply the necessary cleanup. Elias stepped forward from the shadow of my Porsche. He carried a sleek, embossed leather folio and laid it flat against the gleaming black hood of my car. We had one final piece of administrative business to conclude before leaving this toxic suburban wasteland forever. I retrieved my heavy fountain pen from my inner coat pocket. I uncapped it smoothly and leaned over the documents. I signed my name with bold, decisive strokes on the official articles of incorporation. I was not holding this mansion as a personal vacation home. I was legally converting the sprawling, gaudy estate into the official headquarters for a non-profit corporate incubator. I named it the Clear Path Foundation. The facility would be entirely dedicated to funding housing and mentoring female tech entrepreneurs who lack the luxury of generational wealth. I was taking the exact physical space that had been used to coddle and fund an incompetent, entitled son, and I was weaponizing it to empower women who actually knew how to work. It was the absolute poetic eradication of my father's deeply ingrained patriarchal legacy. I handed the signed documents back to Elias. He secured them in his briefcase with a satisfying click. We got into the car and drove back to the financial district, leaving the dust of my past completely in the rearview mirror. The ensuing weeks delivered a masterclass in catastrophic consequences for the people who had tried to extort me. The federal justice system moves with a grinding, inescapable efficiency. Preston was formally indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Because his arrogant sworn deposition provided the federal prosecutors with an airtight, irrefutable confession, they refused to offer him a lenient plea deal. He was trapped in a tiny, depressing holding apartment on the wrong side of the city. His government-issued ankle monitor chafed against his skin, a constant blinking reminder that he was facing up to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Simone had executed her exit strategy with the same ruthless, self-serving precision she used to curate her social media feeds. The moment the federal agents had raided Preston's temporary apartment, Simone had her ruthless divorce attorneys file an emergency separation petition. She successfully argued that Preston had financially defrauded her entering the marriage. She took her lucrative business accounts. She took the luxury Range Rover, and she completely legally severed herself from his radioactive existence. She left him entirely alone to face the wrath of the federal government. Howard and Brenda fared no better. Stripped of their mansion, their credit, and their social standing, they were forced into a cramped, moldy two-bedroom apartment that overlooked a noisy interstate highway. Their daily reality was a relentless nightmare of debt collection calls and legal threats. The shady contingency lawyer they had hired for their frivolous lawsuit had dropped them the moment Elias exposed their fraud, but he had promptly sued them for breach of contract and administrative fees. They were drowning in a sea of litigation, completely unable to afford basic groceries, let alone country club memberships. They spent their days trapped in that tiny apartment, pointing fingers and screaming at each other, their marriage buckling under the crushing weight of their own greed. I sat at the head of the obsidian conference table in my corner office at ClearPath Financial. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I was reviewing the final prospectus for our next major corporate acquisition. The company was operating with flawless precision, and the market analysts were actively praising my aggressive, uncompromising leadership style. My phone, resting face up on the polished table, suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message from a number I had not saved, but I recognized the digits immediately. It was Brenda. I leaned back in my leather executive chair and tapped the screen to open the message. It was a massive, desperate wall of text, dripping with her signature brand of manipulative desperation. "Bethany, please," the text read. "I know you are angry. I know we made terrible mistakes, but your father is having chest pains from the stress. We have absolutely no heat in this terrible apartment. We have nothing to eat. Preston is terrified and crying every night. You proved your point. You won. You are the smart one. You are the successful one. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. We just need a $5,000 loan to survive the month. I am your mother. You cannot just let us die out here in the cold. Have some mercy." I stared at the glowing screen. I read the words, absorbing the sheer pathetic desperation radiating from every single syllable. A few years ago, a message like this would have sent me into a panic. I would have felt a suffocating wave of guilt. I would have scrambled to write a check, desperately hoping that my compliance would finally earn their love and respect. Now I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger. There was no sadness. There was no lingering desire for revenge. There was only a profound, quiet emptiness. They were simply strangers who had made a series of catastrophic choices, and they were finally paying the invoice. I did not block her number. Blocking her would mean I cared enough to protect myself from her words. It would give her the satisfaction of knowing she could still trigger an emotional response. Leaving the line open, forcing her to scream into the void and hear absolutely nothing but her own echoing desperation, was the ultimate punishment. I tapped the screen lightly. I hit the option labeled Mark as Read. The notification badge vanished. The message shifted from unread to acknowledged, sending a tiny digital read receipt directly back to her phone. I wanted her to know that I had seen her begging. I wanted her to know that I had read her pathetic, groveling plea for mercy, and I was actively, consciously choosing to ignore it entirely. I pressed the lock button on the side of the phone. The screen went dark, turning into a piece of cold, silent glass. I dropped the phone effortlessly into my designer leather purse. Elias knocked twice on the heavy glass door of my office before pushing it open. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket, a sharp, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "The venture capital board is assembled in the main conference room, Bethany," he announced, his voice ringing with corporate anticipation. "They have the finalized contracts prepared. Are you ready to close this out?" I stood up from my chair, smoothing the lapels of my tailored blazer. I looked out over the bustling, vibrant headquarters I had built from absolutely nothing. I had survived their abuse. I had outsmarted their greed. I had secured my absolute financial independence, and I had permanently eradicated their toxic influence from my life. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady, powerful, and completely free. I walked out of my office and headed straight into the boardroom to close my next $100 million deal. Bethany's journey teaches us a powerful lesson about self-worth and toxic family dynamics. For years, she chased the conditional approval of parents who only saw her as an exploitable resource. The ultimate takeaway is that shared DNA does not entitle anyone to drain your hard work or abuse your kindness. True freedom begins when you stop funding your own mistreatment and start setting unbreakable boundaries. You never owe your success to those who relentlessly rooted for your downfall. Instead, protect your peace and build your own empire. Take a moment today to evaluate your boundaries and please share your experiences in the comments below.